Better.
Hang it in there.
For you. So we're always on. Good evening, Corey DJ.
No, it works.
Oh.
The problem is it's working completely on my
Just came in.
Oh, shut this off.
You have yours on down there?
I think this is on.
Yes. Ours is
On.
maybe just every other one.
John brought some lights and metal wash. We already need, or all we can use.
So these are who went here.
It's the December 17th, 2018 meeting of the Greenwich Inland Wetlands and Watercourses Agency. The first item of business is a call to order, which we've done. In terms of alternates sitting in, we have 6 members. Alan, you'll be up tonight. Review and has everybody had a chance to take a look at the draft minutes from last meeting? You have a motion to accept them, please.
Motion. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Madam Director.
I'll pass on my director's report. We've got other things to discuss, so it'll just fall into.
Sorry?
Minutes were amended.
The minutes were amended.
Yeah, my motion was based on the amended minutes.
Okay. And so the amended minutes were in fact approved. Director's report.
I'll pass the things that I've got to discuss or show up in other places in the agenda.
Okay, and we also have the monthly summary.
Okay. So referring to the compliance summary that you received for the fourth quarterly review for October, November, and December, the first couple of weeks in December. A summary of the green sheet submission for the months show that none of the 179 required a permit. 59 had wetlands on site but didn't require a permit. This was either because the activity was either outside of the upland review area or involved minimal to no site disturbance. For incoming applications, we received 10 in October, 12 in November, 15 in December, totaling 37 over the 3 months. 8 of these were agent approvals. For bond releases, 39 requested and 18 initiated by staff. 40 were eligible for release. The total number of inspections over the 3 months were 275. There were some deadlines unmet that include 99 Sterling Road, which you've heard before. The approved planting plan was implemented as of September 2018. However, the demarcation plan has not been submitted or installed, and we haven't received that bond. This issue was previously referred to the law department. 424 Stanwich Road. The homeowner has submitted the bond estimate and a partially revised planting plan. And he has been in communication with staff and intends to comply, but has yet to produce the bond. Now, due to the season of planting, the plantings won't be installed until the spring. 6 Meadowcroft Lane missed the planting deadline, but it's working with a landscaper from New England Land Company to complete the work in the spring. 32 Dairy Road missed the planting deadline, but working with Conte and Conte with the design and the implementation of the plan for the spring. We had 5 violations over the past 3 months, An application has been submitted and will be heard later on the agenda for 145 Weaver Street. 11 Druid Lane will be reviewed later under the violation section of the agenda. 67 Caroline Place is due to submit an application in January. And the cease and correct hearing for 8 Dublin Hill Road and 225 Stanwich Road will be heard at the January agency meeting. And finally, the total number of individuals served during our public counter hours over the past 3 months has been 580.
Thank you very much. Other business? Ms. Sesta?
So today, members were sent a memo from me with some information regarding our fees. So it is normal in the December meeting for the agency to review the fee schedule and make any changes. In our past couple of staff meetings, we have discussed the fee schedule, its appropriateness with regards to the services that the agency and the staff provide. It has generally been a goal of the agency to be neutral with our expenses and revenue. So in looking at that 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago now, the agency dropped the green sheet fee, which I think has generally been met with glee. The other fee that the staff members were discussing was this portion of our additional fees where applicants are assessed, depending on which category you fall into, you're assessed additional fees based on the total acreage of the property. And there are many times where that isn't particularly accurate or accurate reflection of the amount of work put in. This comes from when staff is already familiar with this site, and this has been a third or fourth application that has come before the agency. And then also on properties where you have very extensive wetlands that are well beyond what the area of influence that we're discussing. I think Burning Tree Country Club is a good example of that, where we've looked at some applications that are in one portion of the property, yet there's a whole 100-something other acres. So to better reflect the amount of work that the staff puts in, there are the figures for reducing the extra wetland acreage fee for properties that have been reviewed within the last 15 years, and then likewise would provide some flexibility for calculating what the extra wetland acreage fee would be for those large properties where the activity is confined to just one portion of the property. If you look at the evaluation of our fees for the past several years, 2016 to 17 and 15 to 16, those figures reflect the situation where the green sheet fee was still in place. So you'll see that the surplus for those years was considerably higher than last year, and then the 18-19 is shown as a projected amount based on nearly 6 months of activity so far. So if we reduced that fee, we would be looking to cutting it pretty close to even, with some years being a little less and some years being a little more. So it comes down to the agency's tolerance for being that close to meeting budget. And speaking with Member Rogers, the thing about personnel is those costs do rise every year, so cutting it close may put us behind sooner than we would like. So depending on the agency's feel for this, we could reduce this by 50% instead of going to 0 for that extra fee for recent applications. And we've also seen a trend of waiving applications for violators. So in some respect, the violators are getting a reduced fee, and our budget is being made up by those who are in properly. So just some food for thought there.
How did you come up with 15 years?
Bob. Since he knows it all, that's the reason. it does based on, the longevity of staff in general. So figured the information over the course of 15 years, you're in with a tolerance level of things having changed on site. You will most likely have staff still here who know the site, and so we can capitalize on that historical knowledge.
Bob, how many years have you been with the agency?
October 2001. Can't do the math. What's that?
That's 17 years?
Right.
Okay. And you're planning to serve for another 15?
I'm not going to make an announcement in a meeting.
The problem obviously is if Bob chooses to depart for whatever reason, that 15 years, and how long have,
16.
you've been with the agency 16, and how many years have you actually been deeply involved with the wetlands reports and analysis?
Probably at least 12.
Yeah, I'd be more comfortable with 5 years myself. Do I have a sense of the agency?
Not 15. 15's too long. Less. 5 to 10.
The other thing is we sometimes have applications coming in where the wetlands have been delineated and then redelineated. That is, that although we may have been out there to see them, sometimes people come in with new definitions. Now, how do we handle that? Do we waive the fees, or do we say, wait a minute, this is a completely new application and therefore the additional fees?
That's a good question. Any thoughts on that?
No, historically, I think you're mixing two different things a little bit, because the excess wetland acreage question is generally comes into play in the larger properties that we've repeatedly visited, like Convent of the Sacred Heart and Brunswick and Greenwich Academy and things like that. So that's one thing. If we have a wetland delineation and then someone comes in with a new one that's extremely different, the agency has typically said if both soil scientists are available, get them together to come to a consensus, and we'll take the consensus. Otherwise, we'll take the bigger delineation.
But that involves staff time and effort, which is what this is meant to offset.
But
So
I
what-
don't think they're not, they don't necessarily overlap. That could be in any application on a smaller piece of property with less than an acre of wetlands, so it wouldn't fall under this excess wetland or extra wetland, not excess wetland.
Okay. Are there any other comments from the agency?
Not on that subject, but Pat, I think the cutting it this close to the budget, in other words, trying to end up budget neutral each year with the variances that we have, I think this cuts it too close. And I think in this budgetary environment that we're in, you don't want to be over budget. You can avoid it, or conversely, in the way this is written. So I'd give yourself more breathing room.
Oddly enough, and I don't disagree with you, we're the only permitting agency, land use agency, that has this budget neutral thing. It predates me, so I don't really have a sense of its origin, but I do find it somewhat different.
And I
You're
would
being
add,
diplomatic.
and I would add that the agency provides services to the town beyond reviewing applications. We field public inquiries, we go out, we do things, public education, we do many things beyond specific regulatory work. So the town is actually getting a free ride on us.
I don't disagree with that, Bob, but again, when you're in a budget discussion, for example, if the RTM none of what you just said is appreciated. So it's
Well,
kind of.
that I did want to put out in a public meeting,
Yeah.
because I feel that very strongly, and I
Well, I know
understand.
you're right.
I understand the budgeteers have their own view.
Yeah.
So what would happen if we took the estimate of the revenue and said we tried to get 10% of that down to the bottom line to give you a cushion? So in other words, those numbers there would be more reflective as if you gave $50,000 instead of 26 and then 33.7.
So more like they were in 16 and 15, but that had the green sheet, benefit of the green sheet revenue. Right. So,
Yes, the green sheet revenue was in and around 30,000.
okay, that's helpful. So that's the variable. Work that number for us.
Well, given what's been said, I'd prefer to keep things as they are myself. Any other comments?
How about the second portion, which speaks to properties like Brunswick or Burning Tree, where we would look to calculate that acreage more discretely to the affected area rather than property-wide.
That makes sense.
Yeah, that's fine.
And we've been somewhat informal on that, so I don't think that will actually affect our revenues since it's been out there to some extent already.
Right, so you don't need authorization. You've already been doing it. Nobody's complaining about it, so just continue doing it.
What are we agreeing on the 15 years? Are we changing?
No, we're not changing. We're not going to change
Stick-
the
keep it
fee
as is.
schedule. At least that's my position. But I do need to hear from the others on the agency.
I'm not that comfortable with such a close margin. I will tend to agree with Bill.
I agree with that sentiment.
Okay.
I think we should see what happens for at least another couple of years.
Well, yeah, and I agree with that. And the way the economy's going right now, we can expect that the amount of development in town might drop off materially. So I guess the sense of the agency is we leave things as they stand. Agreed? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's do the consent approvals first. Do we have any comments, questions, or remarks from the agency on the two consent approvals, 49 Byfield Lane and 40 Stonebrook Lane? Okay, could I have a motion to approve the consent approvals?
Motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor? Thank you. Let's go to the public hearings then. First up is 2018-152, 20 Meadowmarsh Lane, Conti and Conti LLC for Martin Alex removal of man-made pond, creation of a rain garden, and modification of the terrace.
I'll do a read into the record, read into the minutes, the record of what's in the file, but I'd like to point out that Ms. Curlin, Mr. Schoendorf, and Mr. Rossi visited the site today. Let's see. Items in the file include, in no particular order, stormwater management standard, drainage report exemption dated February. Okay, that's not properly typed. That's a typo. This is a brand-new drainage exemption form. Let's see, application form filled out, photos that the applicant provided. The application itself was received on November 20th, 2018.
Come on, John.
The
First day at this job?
public notice was printed in the Greenwich Times on December 4th, 2018. A field investigation with photos was conducted on December 3rd, 2018. A soils report by Otto Thiel, soil scientist, recently conducted and received into the file on December 4th, 2018. The staff report that I'm going to summarize in a second, which is dated December 11th, 2018, and plans including an existing conditions plan and a landscape overview for the Alex resident, 20 Meadowmarsh Lane, prepared by Conti and Conti, dated November 19th, 2018, and the topographic survey of the property prepared by Earth Image LLC and certified by Michael Finkbeiner, land surveyor, received December 5th, and the date on that is November 19th, 2018. Okay, this pond was excavated from a wetland in 1993. That was done under a permit issued by this agency. The applicant proposes to fill it and restore it with a native plant species. There's an ornamental swale to the west of the pond that is not a watercourse, and it's not flagged wetlands. It too is going to be filled. The applicant also proposes to reconfigure and enlarge the terrace on the house, which is, that work's going to take place about 75 feet from the wetland. I would point out, it's noted in the staff report, there are two properties here. 20 Meadowmarsh is where the residence is located, and then 15 Greenwich Cove Drive is a vacant lot where the pond and this ornamental swale are. The rest of that property is maintained as lawn. There's some scattered larger trees, but it's mostly turf grass. Let's see. So in 1993, it's interesting, the wetland staff noted that this wetland was a pocket wetland, was, quote, probably one of the only remaining natural inland wetlands in the vicinity, and it was vegetated with a mix of native woody vegetation, including maples, ash, shrub dogwood, sedges, rushes, and jewelweed, and some non-native species such as multiflora rose. But given that, and given the application for whatever reason at the time, the agency authorized the conversion of the wetland to a pond. At present, this pond appears to have very limited functions. It's very small. I calculated it to be about 0.02 acres in size. We've asked for a biological evaluation of the functions and values of the pond. We haven't received that evaluation. As I said, we did receive a soils report that confirmed wetland soils around the edge of the pond, and by inference, that's where the wetland had been. But it's not an environmental or biological evaluation. It's important to get this. We need to know how this plan will change the functional status of the pond compared to its current condition. It should explain how the applicant proposes to restore a functional and statutorily valid wetland. And I think this is important because if they excavated several feet of wetland soil out of this pond and they put several feet of material back, if the hydrology and the soils aren't suitable, it may not qualify as a wetland. Let's see. We want to know that the material they put in there and the hydrological regime is going to be suitable for the plants they're proposing to install. And I think in the absence of this information, we really can't determine whether the applicant's proposal is the most prudent and feasible way of achieving their objective. We don't want to end up with a filled pond and no wetlands on this property, so I recommend the agency leave this hearing open until the adequate information is provided for the agency to make a determination on this application.
Conti, were you sitting when this thing was approved?
93, no,
Thank you.
not yet. Mr. Chairman, thank you. My name is John Conte. I'm the landscape architect, and I have been looking at this project. And I do have an environmental report from soil scientist Otto Thiel, which I would be happy to give to Bob, or we have multiple copies if anybody wanted to scan it now, but may I give this to you? Okay, so briefly, the owners of this property contacted me with a request for a solution to what, as Bob described, is kind of a failing pond, an area that has become pretty much just stagnant standing water. And it was originally constructed as a landscape feature, almost entirely man-made, entirely man-made, adjacent to what was a sort of roughly marked out flagged wetland from Burton Low back in the 90s, what we had as a record then. From what we can tell, I've put up here on both sides, this is a map that's mostly taken from Mr. Michael Finkbeiner's work. And I should mention that with us tonight here, we do have Michael Finkbeiner. We also have the owner, Mr. Dennis Alex, and we have Otto Thiel, who are available for questions if need be. So on this side, you can see on my right, you can see the existing conditions, and on the left is the proposed plan. And basically, as I mentioned, the owners contacted me and said, we'd really like some alternatives for what can be done with this. It's a mosquito breeding ground, it's stagnant water. In order for it to look good at all, I've got to pump fresh water into it to keep it viable, otherwise there's no incoming flow. And it's really just an eyesore for us and a problem for us. So if you could come up with some alternatives, we would appreciate that. Having a certain sensitivity to wetlands, I immediately understood that the project here was not to eliminate, fill, and eradicate a wetland, but it was to work with it and to try to improve the area, try to improve the function of it, and actually end up with something better than what we have now. Mr. Thiel has prepared a very nice report that I will paraphrase for us briefly, because I think it's important to read this into the record as to what our plan is and what our intentions are. The proposal involves reshaping what is now the ponded area, bringing up the contours to eliminate the standing water. The good news is that it's not going to require several feet, as Bob worried, that it might be several feet down and several feet back up. From what we can tell from the survey work that Mr. Finkbeiner has done, the bottom of the pond is calculating at roughly elevation 2.5 to 3.0, although it's a mucky, soft bottom. So if you stick a ruler in there, you got to kind of guess when you want to start measuring. But it's really call it at about elevation 2.5 to 3. And there's an outflow pipe at elevation 3.85, which drains off the surface of the pond. And I think if you can see the photos down below, you can almost see the bottom through this sort of reddish, murky water. The pond is very, very shallow. So really what we're talking about is vertical dimensions that are within 2 feet, plus or minus. So what we would intend to do is, when that pond was dug, it looks like the fills were taken from the middle and just kind of cast around the edges. So we really want to take a lot of what's there and move it back towards the middle of the deepest part of the pond again. And then we would import, under Mr. Thiel's direction and specification, a silty, sandy loam, a quality soil, probably really not much more than 10 to 20 cubic yards, maybe of import. We might be moving around a total of 40 or 50 cubic yards by my calculations. If need be, we can be more specific with that, but those are the general numbers. We're not talking about, this is a small project, we're not talking about thousands of yards, we're talking about under 100. That would be moved around, and maybe even under 20 that would be imported altogether. And the reason for doing that is because from our soil tests, it's kind of a mixed fill, and we would want to bring in some quality loam to ensure the best viability of the plants that we plan on bringing in. The grading would be done in such a way as to create a basin that would still remain just above the static groundwater level. At tests done this week, the groundwater level is at high tide, because I do think it's affected tidally, comes in at about 3.6, elevation 3.6 or so, and we're looking to top out at about 3.8 to the bottom of our pond, our basin, so that we're holding a little bit for stormwater capacity as an added benefit. And it would be contoured in such a way, as you can see in the center of that oval there, would actually hold stormwater and allow it to infiltrate into the ground. So currently, if that pond is full and there's a storm, the water immediately goes out through a pipe into the nearby marsh through the dike along the side of the property. So there's really no stormwater benefit or holding capacity when that pond is full. In our plan, there would be a basin there that would allow water to infiltrate and be purified through the magic of soil and root systems. The resulting effect would be that when this is done, instead of this open standing water, we'll have a densely vegetated habitat with increased wetland functions. The enhanced wetland would improve water quality, provide additional opportunities for fauna, and reduce disease-spreading insect habitat, which it's really great at right now. Currently, in the standing water, there's a lack of emergent vegetation, which limits the wetland's ability to remove suspended particles and soluble pollutants. And I'm paraphrasing from Otto's report. The ponding also results in poorly dissolved oxygen conditions that leads to the remobilization of contaminants. The planted wetland, on the other hand, will provide much better removal of these particulates and soluble pollutants. The denser the vegetation, the more effective this purifying process is. And Otto also points out that there's a more rapid breakdown of deposited organic material in a scenario where there's wetting and drying and wetting and drying. That cycle creates iron oxide coatings that bind pollutants in the soil. So in all, we feel that this project is actually a vast improvement over what's there. It is fully our intention to maintain it as a wetland in the area that we reshape, which is closer to what was originally there, towards that northeast corner. It is not at all our intention to fill this with some sort of impervious material and create a solid surface. So it does provide, our plan is for it to provide for a viable wetland. And we would have, as you can see, the owners have retained myself, Mr. Thiel, Mr. Finkbeiner, the experts that we think will be necessary to sort of shepherd the process. We're not going to just walk away at this point. This would be a project that would be monitored as it went in and monitored in the future to make sure it stays viable. I'd be more than happy to take questions or to have any of our other members here speak. Is there anything you need to say at this point, or wait for questions?
I just wanted to establish the title
Thank you.
characteristics.
Michael Finkbeiner.
I was involved. I was a surveyor for the original pond construction. There was a certain design. As you know, Shorelands is a bermed area and has a berm at elevation NAVD 10, which is occasionally overtopped by storms. The elevation of the pipe outflow from this pond is at 3.84. Mean high tide is under the current tidal epoch, which is about to expire, 3.35. And therefore, the pipe was set 6 inches over mean high tide. There's a flapper valve on the saltwater side so that storm tides cannot come in. And the notion here is simply that the hydrology of the site is not going to be impacted, and there will continue to be a non-interaction with the tidal cycle, except that in a storm, sort of all bets are off, but certainly the freshwater input is, instead of flowing out rapidly, will maintain itself at just above the mean high tide level. And I'm not asserting that there's a tidal influence, but only that this is an old tidal Spartina marsh. And you may, say that it's, you may think of it as a rare environment to have a freshwater wetland, but this was a freshwater wetland constructed in 1923 on top of a former tidal marsh. And therefore, that's like saying that gum trees are a rare species in Greenwich. Yes, that might be true, but they're a very common species. Nevertheless, because we're order of range or change in environment.
Thanks, Mike. Thank you. I think that that covers our summation. We'd be happy to answer any questions. Do we have any questions, Bob?
How far is the pond moving?
Excuse me?
It looks like the pond is actually moving.
It's moving about half of its area. So if you took it's about 1,000 square feet right now, and the area that we're anticipating would be wetland will still be about 1,000 square feet, but to the northeast, back closer to where it was in the Berthelot map. So it's moving about halfway over its own volume, surface.
And what will the surface area be after you're done?
Well, it's hard to exactly quantify because it won't be a pond anymore with sharp edges like it has now. But the area that we're shooting for elevation 4.0, which is kind of where once the water gets to 3.85, it eventually drains out. But, in a storm, it would probably get to about 4.0. That's about 1,000 square feet.
As well?
Yes.
Okay. And just as a curiosity, does anybody know what the 1923 wetland surface area was?
If you look at this.
Michael, were you here to do it?
The 1923 map is entitled Beach Cottages, and it literally is beach cottages built on the Spartina grass. So I believe that the entire short lands subdivision of 1923 was built on top of a tidal marsh. High tide back in 1923 was about 8 inches lower. So we could say that the salt level of the marsh was approximately elevation 3 in the current system. And so in that sense, it was not a built wetland, it was a built subdivision with fill that had a wet spot.
Got it. Thank you.
I'll also say we understand that there's no conditions for approval tonight. We just wanted to get our project explained to you according to Bob's suggestion that, under Regulation 7-11, there's a number of items that be submitted. I think we've addressed most of them, although we can and will produce, a civil engineer's certified plan as to the quantity of fill that would be moved or brought in if that's important. And we could also provide you with a staging plan for, how the work would be done and a full soil and erosion control plan so that we would satisfy all the items in your regulation.
John, what's the area going to be around the pool? It looks like it's grass, the pond. Looks like it's grass lawn.
The lawn is will be between the house and the newly created area. And then as we get to my plan, you can see this white area is the lawn, but everything all up and around that, which includes a lot more area that is lawn now, turned into a very diverse mix of native vegetation in this extensive plant list.
Is there any delineation function or feature?
Not other than the edge of lawn that we proposed. We're certainly open to the idea of
Yeah.
putting some boulders in. That's,
Yeah, I would,
sure.
yeah, because obviously the current owner is devoted to this, but the next
Right.
owner may not be.
Right. No
Pull
problem.
the boulders up.
The only thing is, the delineation would be, trying to think of what we would delineate, because we would want to delineate what is going to be used as the wetland or the basin area. I wouldn't want to delineate across the entire back of the property.
Yeah.
Keeping in mind, it's a buildable lot, possibly at some point.
Can I suggest that we get Mr. Thiel to come up and speak about delineating what's created?
Well, it has been flagged.
No, I mean, what's there
After
now
the-
has been flagged,
right.
but how are we going to know what we're now protecting into the future?
Right, okay. I don't know, Otto, if you want to try to chime in on that. Before you do, I think it might be useful to point out that if I drew over this map, the existing pond is about here. So I was saying before, this outline is my elevation 4.0. And the old wetland from the Burt Low map was like back in here. So what we're doing is we're moving it. I'm trying not to move it as dramatically as all that, because this is kind of the deep point of the pond right now. So our thought is that we'll fill this in, create this as a basin. That outflow point still comes to here at 3.8. So if this is 4.0, I would imagine that what we will recreate is a wetland here in this shape, instead of this shape. But I'll let Otto speak about how to flag that.
John, before you go,
Yeah.
about the root systems on the trees at the northern property here.
As you can see in the pictures, this large double tree is in the embankment, which would not be affected. This one is also in the high spot. The area we're working is around this little apple tree. Where I'm sorry, I think that's a little red maple. So we would be excavating around that one to some extent, and that tree could potentially be a casualty. It's right there. But we're planting so much more back that if that was a casualty, I think it would be more than compensated for. But these trees and the roots here, the excavation would be out around like that. So these large trees I would protect and keep in place.
I'm sorry, who's?
You just have to identify the record.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Otto Thiel. I'm a professional soil scientist. I've been doing this for almost 30 years now. I am the one that delineated the wetland on the property. We had thought we would get topographical measurements for each of the wetland flags, but we don't have them as of yet, but we could still go back and get them. But if you look at the topography that's on the map, the topo shots that we do have, basically where the flags ended up being is right about elevation 4. And that's why John was using elevation 4 as sort of a de facto edge of wetland. So the idea is if we excavate on the back end of that pond and bring it down to elevation 4, and then in the center of it a little bit lower, we'll have the wetland hydrology, because we're only talking about, what is it, about 10 feet or so that it's going back, and horizontally, yeah. So, and I dug a hole about that distance in the area, right in the edge of that area where the most movement of the pond is going to be. So on the backside of that pond now. And that's where we had the, at high tide, we had the 3.6 elevation where the water was weeping in. And so if we, got it down to 4, I think we'll still have the hydrology there. In that particular place, on the edges of the pond, on the front edge nearest the house, you've got, you can actually contact the original mucky peat under a shallow fill at the edges of the pond. At that particular spot at the back end, the fill is actually thicker right there. But so what the idea is, what we would do is we'll monitor the groundwater table. We want to look at it going into the spring and make sure that we're going to have the hydrology to support the pond, the wetland rather.
Questions, comments?
Okay, just to your new flagging, you project will be at that 4.0 contour?
Right. Now, we might make some adjustments as far as we go along. If we see something in the, where the high water is in the spring, then we might make some adjustments as far as how deep we go or maybe how shallow. But so we want to get a wetland, what would mimic a freshwater wetland hydrology.
Is that the monitoring expectations spelled out in your report?
No, it's no, but
Can you put that into writing so our record reflects that expectation?
okay,
Subject to flexibility on that point.
okay.
Yeah, I was gonna suggest that, and also just to affirmatively address Bob's comment about justifying this recreation as a pure wetland as opposed to some type of a rainwater type ponding. To just be affirmatively responding, we've gotten your assessment today, which I think helps address that question. But to the extent we're recreating a wetland here, I think we need an affirmative response to enable us to get past the regulatory standard as well.
Well, the idea is that we want to have not really a pond, but a wetland. So we'll raise the grade, and that's why we want to monitor the groundwater levels. But we'll raise the grade so that we've got what would be as close as we can get to an inland wetland hydrology after the grade is established. That's the goal. Sometimes there will be standing water there. I mean, that's common in a wetland that has a depression in the middle, but it's not supposed to be there all the time.
The wetlands in Connecticut are determined by soil type, as you know, so making sure the hydrology is there is one thing, but what is the soil going to be? Are you going to have wetland soil within 2 feet of the new ground surface? Whether it's as a wetland scientist, I just need you to explain that to me.
That's a good question. Just as an example, there's another project that's before you tonight that I worked on, and there was a wetland flagged on that property, on the adjacent property by Roy Shook years ago, and he mapped it out as an aquant, and not even knowing how he had mapped it, I mapped it as an aquant also, and so it doesn't have all the same characteristics that an unworked wetland has. We're going to bring the soil in, but obviously instantaneously we're not going to get the dark, almost black topsoil and then a gray matrix with models underneath it. That would have to come over years and years. But if we have the hydrology and the vegetation, and it stays, then we would be comfortable that we've created a wetland situation.
If I could add to that, Otto, thank you. I mean, I think that answers that perfectly, because since we're importing and moving fill around, obviously those wetland soils, it's going to be a mix at first, but the important thing, that if you look at the topography of the site, there isn't a natural sheet flow drain. This is sort of a basin yard. It's got the dike around it, which is a, enormously false man-made structure that's around it. And so this area does trap water, which I think is where the genesis for the idea of making it a pond came from in the first place. And there just wasn't the know-how back then to turn it into, a beautiful functioning wetland. So this is the way that they went. But now that that is no longer desired, we're trying to restore, to the best of our ability, a nice viable habitat and make it something better than it is. So really that's our objective here, is to make this into something much better than it is. And with the outflow being at 3.85 and the topography around it at 4, it's going to catch water, and I think it's going to hold water, and it's going to be shaped in a way to funnel water to it. So we're going to do the best we can with it.
Sorry? Yes, of course. Are there any public comments on this application? Do we need a motion to leave the hearing open, or we just leave it open?
You could just leave it open, or if that's what you want to do.
Okay, we'll just leave the hearing open.
And are you expecting anything between now and the next meeting?
I expect that John Conti and Conti will answer all the questions that have been asked.
Including the fill quantities, phasing, things like that.
And
Yep.
demarcation.
And to the best you can, the representation that I asked.
Okay.
I think we started addressing that issue, but it's an interesting question. You're not quite yet a wetland, but you're approaching. In other words, as a soil scientist, I think you've got the affirmative duty to give us a rationale for accepting that change is what we can accept.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a restoration. I mean, it's which means, that we are restoring something that's not currently there. So we're going to do our best with the knowledge that we have to create an incubator for the best possible wetland that's there. So understood. We'll provide you with the quantities, the phasing plan, and our best guess as to where the wetland will be in, as the restoration is completed.
And the role of the monitoring and the expectation of the building that comes from that.
Got it. Okay.
What's the timing of this, tentatively?
We do it this spring, as soon as weather allows.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Next up, 2018-154, 200 North Maple Avenue, Redness and Maine, for Greenwich Academy for demolition and reconstruction of the lower school, northern parking lot, a middle school addition, and pond dredging. Mr. Clausy.
All right. Once again, Ms. Curlin, Mr. Schoendorf, and Mr. Rossi were the 3 agency members who visited the site today. Looking at our list of documents in the file,
How are you, Jeff?
we have the completed application form and the standard supporting documentation signed by the applicant's agent, Brian McMahon of Redness and Mead Incorporated. That application is dated November 20th, 2018. We have a set of plans entitled Greenwich Academy Lower School, prepared by Redness and Mead. A number of sheets. I won't read the detailed list. I would just note that this plan set is certified by Mr. McMahon and also dated November 20th, 2018. Another set of plans entitled Greenwich Academy Lower School, prepared by William Kenny Associates, LLC. These are more landscaping type plans and also wetland watercourse buffer enhancement, habitat enhancement plans. About 8 sheets, and this is certified by William L. Kenny, a Connecticut landscape architect, dated November 20th, 2018. We have a topographic survey depicting the Greenwich Academy campus, certified by Jorge Pereira, Connecticut licensed surveyor, dated May 1st, 2018. A drainage summary report and draft stormwater management practices maintenance declaration prepared by Redness and Mead and certified by Mr. McMahon on November 20th. Wetland assessment report prepared by William Kenny Associates, dated November 2018. A phasing plan prepared by AP Construction, dated December 1st, 2018. A comments provided by the DPW Engineering Division, Scott Marucci, Senior Civil Engineer. This is his review and comments on the plans and on the drainage report. His comments are dated December 10th. My staff report, December 13th. And let's see, these are all things that are standard application materials. Okay, that one. Public hearing notice was published in the Greenwich Time on December 4th. I believe that the second publication date was late last week. And we also notified all the abutting property owners prior to the statutory required date. So to that list, I would add a letter we received today from a neighbor, Donald Fritz, 300 North Maple Avenue. I provided this letter to Mr. McMahon, and it was put in your folders this evening, so each agency member here has a copy of it, and Mr. McMahon may wish to address some of the points Mr. Fritz raises. All right, the Greenwich Academy proposes to undertake some major renovations and changes on their campus at North Maple Avenue. A great deal of this work will take place beyond the edge of the upland review area of both the on-site pond, the wetland at the north side of the site, and a little watercourse that runs to the north of the pond. There is a fourth wetland at the far southern end of the site, which is way outside of any proposed activity. The activities that fall within upland review areas or wetlands are shown on sheet C2.1, and they include the demolition of the existing lower school, the construction of a middle school addition, a replacement of the northern parking lot with a larger facility, a larger parking lot, dredging the pond, and landscaping improvements to both wetlands and upland areas. And it's notable here that expansion of the northern parking lot as proposed will eliminate a 215 square foot wetland, which is right about there. Okay. Comments on the various pieces of the various activities that I've mentioned just now. The demolition of the lower school and construction of the middle school addition, which will occur in this area, just to the east of the on-site pond, will occur in the second summer of the project according to the phasing plan we've been provided. They have a pretty detailed erosion and sedimentation control plan, and the proper installation and maintenance of these measures will, I feel, be sufficient protection to the pond and this little linear wetland that goes right down here at the edge of the a playground that's over here right now. It's also important, as detailed on their detail sheet, to protect all catch basins and any drain pipes that are running from the existing buildings, because they end up going either to the pond or to the wetland to the north, or to a roadway drain system that then daylights into some water course maybe to the east. This sort of like there's a little three-part watershed right here, north, west and south, and east. So that's important to protect on as well, and compliance staff will have to monitor that during construction. Now, replacement of this northern parking lot is scheduled to occur the first summer of the project, and this obviously with that direct wetland elimination and very close activity to the wetland corridor that runs right here at the far northern end of the site. This is the activity that has the greatest potential to have an adverse wetland impact. They're going to be lifting the grade of the new parking lot about 7 feet in this northwest corner. The new parking lot, the northern half of it is going to be underlaid by a stone reservoir. It's going to be stormwater management structure as well as a surface parking area. So there's a lot of filling, a lot of grading, a lot of demolition of the existing parking that will have to take place. I think rather than just a double row of silt fencing and hay bales down at the northern limit of construction, some chain link fence or some very major barrier should be placed, because bringing in stone, dumping stone, one bad tip and we're filling the wetland with that stuff. So that's one recommendation I would give. I'm happy to see that shade trees are proposed for the islands in the parking lot. This will help to moderate the temperature of the pavement and the temperature of the runoff into the drainage system and potentially into the wetland. Now, as I said, this small wetland will be eliminated as they expand the parking lot and grade beyond the edge of the parking lot. I believe this little wetland was isolated from the larger corridor to the north in 1985 when the agency approved a berm at the northern end of the existing parking lot. And as to quote the wetland assessment report description of the wetland, it's a heavily disturbed mix of turf grass and bare soil with, quote, little to no functional capacity. As I say here in my report, the applicant should describe what alternatives they may have considered that would not require the elimination of this wetland, and give the agency some sense of the prudent and feasibility of any of these alternatives versus their proposed plan. Pond dredging. The applicant proposed to hydraulically dredge about a foot of sediment from this pond. The reason given is that this is a nutrient source. They've been having to treat the pond chemically in recent years to control nuisance aquatic vegetation, and they think that by getting rid of the nutrients, they may be able to avoid chemical inputs. They have not provided any analytical data to support this, the efficacy of this plan, and it may be that this is one of those ponds that doesn't need to be dredged. It's about 10 feet deep in the middle. Vines and other invasive plants are to be removed from the naturally maintained area around the pond. And I have to say, I hadn't been on this part of the Academy property for a while, and walking around the pond, it's actually a pretty nice pond. For a suburban pond, you're more likely to see grass maintained to the water's edge. This has a very nice vegetated upland along the edge of the pond. An educational enhancement they propose is to build a viewing pier at the north end of the pond and establish 2 floating wetland pads, which Mr. Kenny can explain in more detail if the agency wishes. And finally, they propose some extensive landscaping improvements, particularly in and around the wetland corridor here at the north end of this actively used part of the campus. They're proposing to convert lawn to a grove of native trees, meadow, and a pollinator garden, and doing some other sort of more intensive recreational improvements as far as making a new playground and some courtyard and viewing area and another turf playground. All right, DPW has reviewed the stormwater management plan and has asked for some revisions to the northern parking lot system. I would note that working these details out is unlikely to alter this plan if this is the plan that the agency feels the applicant has presented as the most prudent and feasible alternative. I know the folks are out in force tonight, and I think they're going to make their best case. I did provide conditions of approval if all of the agency's questions are answered by the end of tonight's session.
Thank you, Bob. Good evening. Brian McMahon, licensed professional engineer with Redness and Mead Engineers, Land Surveyors. Here tonight on behalf of Greenwich Academy. With me tonight is Bill Kenny from William Kenny Associates. From the Academy, we have Molly King, head of school, Andrea Sabazzana, CFO, and we also have project attorney Bruce Cohen and land planner Michelle Cronin from Fogarty, Cohen, Russo, and Nemiroff. And what Bob has really described quite a bit of it. What I had intended to do is just give a brief overview of the existing site. If you could switch it back, Doreen, if you don't mind, to the existing. And then describe the site plan without trying to be too redundant from what Bob has described already. And while I do want to speak about drainage to the agency members, because I know it's of interest to staff and the agency members, as well as Mr. Fritz, who I see is here tonight, I'll segue over to Bill to speak about the wetland resources on the site, the landscaping that he's proposed, the impacts to those wetland resources, and how it's being mitigated through the site plan. So just briefly, the site is 33 acres in size. It is fronted along North Maple on the east. It is fronted along the south, along the athletic fields on Deer Park Drive, just a little bit on Patterson Road, out by the intersection of Patterson and North Maple, and then otherwise bounded by single-family residential properties along the east, or excuse me, the west, the north, and the remainder of the south. I point out that in addition to this application, the project is currently being considered as a final site plan and special permit before the Planning and Zoning Commission, and with a likely hearing date, a hopeful likely hearing date of February 5th. Additionally, it's currently running through the ARC, and we're hopeful that they begin their review in early January. So the site plan itself, if you don't mind ticking ahead, please, Doreen. So the site plan itself, although it has a variety of different elements to it, the crux of the site plan project is to demolish and reconstruct the lower school on the campus, together with a whole host of different pieces of site work that go along with it. But one of the things that we're doing is, there we go, right here. Oh.
It's still the existing one.
There you go. That's the one. That's good. So some years ago, the Academy purchased the property at 2 Patterson Avenue, here on the corner of Patterson and North Maple. addition, obviously, it historically was a single-family residence. It's not occupied now. Part of the proposal calls for the demolition and removal of that house, attendant structures and site work associated with it, and replacing it with landscaping and green space, which Bill can describe further. There is also the property at 176. It's all part of the overall 33-acre campus, but the residence, I should say, at 176 North Maple, which has historically been used as the residence for the facilities director, is also proposed to be demolished and removed. And in its place, as a matter of housekeeping here, in its place, we have proposed on your site plans here to construct a paved permanent parking lot there. Since we have submitted to the Wetlands Agency, we have revised the plan, and so what is on file with the Planning and Zoning Commission, in deference to one of the neighbors in the area there, and in speaking with them, in deference to that, we have removed that permanent paved parking area and instead are calling for a grass overflow parking area in that same vicinity with screening around the perimeter, mostly the southern perimeter there and the eastern perimeter where the road is. So as a housekeeping matter, it's a change to what you've got in your file now.
And just to, the agency's clear, none of those activities within any wetland upland review.
Correct. Many of, as you mentioned, Bob, many of the activities that are being proposed on the site are outside of any of the regulated areas. I just want to tick down them so that the commission has a full accounting of what's being proposed out there. We are adding some parking and some driveway improvements here, widening to improve not just parking, but also traffic circulation through the site. And then, of course, part of the bigger, one of the bigger issues is demolishing the existing lower school, which is here, constructing on the remaining north end of the middle school, because they are attached now, constructing a small addition on the north face of the existing middle school to remain, reconstructing a new, or constructing, I should say, a new lower school right here. Of course, with all the grading, utility service, drainage improvements, landscaping, a playground that Bill can speak to a little bit more in detail. This structure right here, sorry for the shaky hand, this structure right here is the known as the Cowan Center. It is a original carriage house for the site, and it currently houses a preschool / daycare operations at the school. As part of this proposed project, we are proposing to remove an addition that was constructed to the structure and to displace the preschool and daycare operations to another site down the road at 96 Maple Avenue. I mention that because there is also a pending request before the Planning and Zoning Commission for that permit. And instead, what we are doing, what the school is proposing to do in the remaining structure here, the original carriage house, is to move the facilities and maintenance operations, which are currently in this general vicinity here, and consolidate it and move it. And you'll see with the improved north parking lot, relocate all of those operations, including a fleet of vehicles that are now maintained or kept and maintained up here, which sits much higher than the road. It's much more visible. And we feel that once consolidated down here, which sits lower than the road, will be much better shielded from the public view.
That structure is going to remain at Cowan Center?
Largely. There's a portion of it that was an addition that will be removed as part of this project, but the original building, carriage house, will remain and be repurposed for the facilities. I point out that there's an existing apartment in that structure now, and as part of the proposal, there will be an apartment above it for staff. As Bob mentioned, larger pieces of site work is the reconfiguration of the north lot. It is on its west, north, and generally in the area here. It is generally in the location that it is out there today. But we are reconfiguring it to add some parking and also improve circulation for pickup and drop-off through the lot. I will speak after Bill does about the drainage associated with that, because I know it's an area of concern. And of course, we're proposing to dredge the on-site pond, and I think it's a good segue to tip it over to Bill.
Before you tip it
Sure.
over, just talk about the prudent feasible alternative issue. How is it that parking lot is configured such that you've had to eliminate the wetland?
We actually did go through quite a bit back and forth in different scenarios for the parking lot, and actually Bill will be speaking to that up front.
Good evening. I am Bill Kenny, principal of William Kenny Associates in Fairfield, Connecticut. I am a professional wetland scientist, soil scientist, and landscape architect. My firm was hired to help with both the wetland consulting and the landscape architecture services for this project. What I'd like to do for you with my presentation is just briefly go through the existing conditions and proposed conditions as they relate to the wetlands that are immediately adjacent and within some of the proposed improvements, and review with you those conditions. And in our opinion, in summary, we find that the work that's proposed will have a substantial benefit to the overall wetlands on the property, both their size, they'll be increased in both area and capacity, wetland functional capacity. The first figure I'd like to review with you is an enlargement of a drawing that's included in the report that we submitted to you, the wetland assessment report. And this drawing shows the wetlands that are in the northern portion of the property. This map is a partial plan of the northern portion of the campus, and we have photos and very clear indications of the different wetland and watercourse systems on the property in that area where the proposed work is. There's two primary systems. One is the man-made pond that is shown here. It's a pond with a fringe of wetland that borders it around the entire border. It is an isolated feature in the landscape. It does not have a significant stream or surface water inflow. It's a rather interesting water feature from that perspective as far as the pond goes. It does have a piped outlet on the southern end of the pond, and so that pipe extends several hundred feet below some existing athletic fields that are south of the pond, and then discharges into a small wetland at the southwest corner of the campus. And so it was surprising when I first went onto the property. I expected that pond to drain north where much of the land in this area is draining, but it actually has a southern discharge. And its inflow is primarily groundwater discharged into the pond, shallow subsurface flow and some deeper flow. There's a significant ridge that rises up to the west of this pond and a residential neighborhood to the west, and so there's a fair amount of water that comes down through that slope system and makes its way into that pond. As has been described by Bob, it's a fairly deep pond. It has a nice depth, a depth that you would want to have for a pond if you want to support a fish population. It's about 10 feet in its deepest portion, so that we were actually surprised to find that as well. The school is under contract with the Pond and Lake Connection, a pond management company, and that company has evaluated the pond and has made recommendations to the school and is working to help to deal with the eutrophic or over nutrient enrichment of the pond through different things such as herbicide treatments for algae and floating duckweed that's often quite invasive on the surface of the pond, as well as an aeration system. By aerating the pond, it helps to prevent the release of nutrients from muck that forms over time, organic deposits that form over time at the bottom of the pond. Around the perimeter of the pond is a nice naturalized buffer that the school has maintained. There's a split rail fence around that provides a demarcation feature between the school improvements and that pond. Quite a bit of native species within that buffer, but there's also invasive species, as you find throughout many areas in town, including porcelain berry and some other vines that can be quite aggressive. There are areas of emergent shelf along the perimeter of the pond. This is areas of emergent wetland plants that, such as cattails and other emergent plants that are growing in standing water on the edge of the pond, versus wetland plants that might be growing in saturated soil conditions as you get off the banks of the pond. The other wetland system that I like to describe is a watercourse. It's primarily a watercourse system with a bordering wetland that the cover type in the wetland varies along its length. And it flows in from the west, similar as the flow that's going to the pond, flows through a forested area in this area here, and then comes down. This whole area had been, both of these wetland systems were significantly manipulated and degraded and managed over many, many decades when this property was part of the estate for the Rockefeller estate. So they made this pond and they manipulated this watercourse. This watercourse passes through some walls, and there's some short segments of culverts, stone culverts in here. So it comes down a forested segment, passes through a very large retaining wall in this area. And for this length, it runs through a lawn, area of lawn, where there's very little watercourse characteristics, just flowing through the lawn area there. And then at the southwest corner of the existing parking lot, the wetland ends, and the water from that watercourse and wetland enters a pipe. This pipe has been in for many decades. It predates the 1985 permit that was granted for the expansion of the parking lot. The pipe extends then from the eastern end of that wetland all the way north below a wetland area to the north, and then ends at the property line where there's another pipe that then extends further north from there. So by piping this, they have substantially this wetland that's to the north here, because they've taken the water. This used to all be one wetland system. Many, many decades ago, there was probably a connection of wetlands through here, and that was eliminated when improvements were made over many decades with parking lots and the installation of that pipe. More recently in 1985, where they expanded the parking lot and they made it into a two functioning system. One was to function as a parking lot, and the other was to function as a surface stormwater basin. I think this is the first time I've seen something like this. I've seen many times where an athletic field or something like that might be used as a stormwater basin, but not a parking lot. What that means, they installed a berm along the northern edge of the parking lot, several feet tall. The parking lot pitches down to that berm. When they have substantial storms, you'll get 3 or 4 feet of water ponding in the lower portions or the northern portion of that parking lot, and cars are flooded and totaled. And that happened this year with the extreme storms that we had, particularly in September. They lost a few cars that were a total after being flooded. So a major piece of this development is to eliminate that dual function of being a surface detention basin and a parking lot. And as Brian described what that entails then, instead of having that pitched parking lot lift up the northern end and store the water below the parking lot instead of storing it on top of the parking lot. When they built that berm, they created a very small piece of wetland right here, 200 square feet. So there's a 200 square feet here, and then you have that northern wetland here that is drained because the pipe goes through it. So the berm is right between those two, and this is a leftover piece. It's maintained as lawn. You can see the photo that we have. Where's that photo? Oh, right here in the lower left-hand corner. It's been drained. Any vegetative wetland, there is no wetland community there. It's functioning more as an upland than it is as a wetland at this point. So it's offering no significant or measurable functions as a wetland at this point. So with the elevating the parking lot to provide subsurface stormwater quality and quantity functions, there's a slope that comes down off that parking lot, and that's where this wetland is under that slope. So what I'd like to do is go through and continue to talk about some other improvements on the property, and then we'll come back to an alternatives with regard to that particular piece. The proposed pond improvements include the dredging, the removal of the muck layer. We were surprised to find that it was relatively shallow. We expected it to be much deeper. The pond and lake connection, the school's pond management company had recommended to the school to do a number of things to help with the eutrophication. One was the aerator, the other was treatment for plant life. That was the algae and duckweed. And the last was to dredge that material. There's two primary reasons that you would dredge a pond. One is to create a depth to support fish, which is that 8 or 10 feet depth. Since this pond is already that deep, we wouldn't be dredging for that purpose. But the second reason for dredging is to remove organic muck that accumulates in a pond, in the bottom of a pond over time. When there is low dissolved oxygen in a pond, it allows for nutrients to be released from the muck that accumulates over time. So it can be difficult to maintain the increased dissolved oxygen content and to prevent the release of the nutrients from that muck. So often it is proposed, very commonly proposed, to remove the muck because it is a source of nutrients. So that was the reason for the proposed dredging. We will be working more closely before the next meeting to review this with the school's pond management company and provide you with additional information. We proceeded with a pond dredging based on their recommendation, but it has been our experience too that removal of the muck is a good thing in general, whether it's very deep or shallow like it is here, a foot depth.
And
so
why wouldn't you use an aerator, either prior or subsequent to?
So they are using an aerator now. We're going to review with them. Maybe it's a different type of aerator. Maybe we could look at different methods of aeration to help control that muck layer. So we'll be back with additional information regarding that.
So they use an aerator now.
Yes.
So why is it that the pond has low DO?
We didn't measure it, but yes. Well, we're going to work with them to find out. They made recommendations to the school, and so I think it certainly based at a minimum on their observations of the algae and the duckweed episodes that they were finding in the pond. So we'll find out more. With that northern wetland that has the watercourse coming down, we have focused on the portion of that wetland that is currently maintained as lawn in this area here. Not only is it lawn, but then the existing playground equipment is within a few feet of that wetland in the western portion of its length, and lawn is throughout, and it's within the buffer as well. So what we're proposing to do is to introduce some physical structure of a more natural watercourse by introducing cobble-sized stone and boulders to the watercourse and introduce more of a pool and riffle, even on a very small effect, but to provide these different types of hydrogeomorphic features within the stream, both physically and to provide small areas of ponding, and then by introducing stone. And we have a photo on one of the drawings that we submitted for you, and photos and sections to show how we propose to do that work within the stream. Then next, so first alter its physical features to make it more natural, and then the other is to vegetate it, remove the lawn and replace it with native ground cover, shrubs, and trees. And that'll be both in the wetland itself as well as in the buffer bordering the wetland. We're pulling the playground away from the wetland, so now it's, rather than a couple feet, it's 10 or 15 feet away from the wetland, and more in many locations. We're introducing a pollinator garden. The school is very active with, they have what they call a green team at the Greenwich Academy, and active in using native plants on the campus. And this will be one location where there'll be a real focus on having a pollinator garden. We're also going to have, on the south end of the campus, where one of the homes is proposed to be removed, introducing a pollinator garden there. It's far from wetlands, but we wanted to get these areas on both ends of the campus. With this work, we are also proposing at the very eastern end to actually expand the area of wetland. The enhancement of wetland in that area will be 1,650 square feet. And the expansion of wetland will be about 750 square feet. And as been discussed earlier, the small area of wetland here that is proposed to be removed is about 215 square feet of non-functioning wetland, and we're proposing to replace that with 750 square feet of higher functioning, much higher functioning wetland here, so that's about a 3.5 to 1 ratio. And then if you look at the enhancements here of 1,650 square feet, that's about a 50 to 1 ratio, if you don't even include the wetland expansion, a 50 to 1 compared to that 200 square feet there. Or maybe a 20 to 1, excuse me. Lastly, so those are the improvements around that wetland area. And lastly, I want to mention some improvements related to this northern wetland that has been drained because of the pipe that runs below it and directs water away from that wetland. As part of this subsurface system and the introduction of porous pavement in the northern portion of the parking lot, going to be taking the water that comes into this pipe through all this watercourse, through this enhanced watercourse, and that enters that pipe now. That water is going to be introduced into this subsurface infiltration area and allowed to infiltrate into the ground and slowly make its way through shallow subsurface flow towards this wetland to the north, and provide an opportunity to help rehydrate that wetland and make it a more naturally functioning wetland, higher functioning wetland. So with regard to alternatives, there's always, the first alternative is to do nothing, not to raise the parking lot and cause a disturbance in that area, and leave the parking lot at its current elevation and leave this area that is man-made at this point and disturbed. The next is to build a retaining wall right against the parking lot in that area. We felt that with all the improvements that are happening elsewhere on the property and due to the existing conditions of this wetland, not unlike what recently happened at the Brunswick School with the proposed tunnel that was proposed below King Street, where there was some drained and low functioning wetlands there. It's a very similar situation where the agency reviewed that and approved impacts to that wetland when the proposal included substantial creation of new wetland and enhancement of existing wetlands. So one alternative was to do nothing. Another is to construct a fairly substantial retaining wall right here. And then there is the preferred alternative to do this plan with all the enhancements that are proposed.
That parking lot isn't being increased?
The size of it is increasing.
Being slightly increased, the location of the northerly curb line on there is being shifted just slightly to the north.
Maybe 5 feet, something like that.
Not in the wetland area.
The actual physical, no.
The parking lot doesn't extend into the wetland area, that's
The
correct.
fill.
No, I understand, but there's no increase into the, this is strictly to address that berm issue, right?
Yes.
So there's no other way to do that?
You could,
Well, you talked about retaining.
right, you could put a substantial retaining wall there. It's 200 square feet, 10 by 20. Just,
How many parking spaces are in the lot now? How many parking spaces will be in the lot subsequently?
I think so, 192.
And how many after? You're going to increase it by 20. Yes, please. So,
Bill, could you talk about what's the elevation of the proposed parking lot compared with the elevation of North Maple, with that area?
Brian, the elevation of North Maple with respect to the elevation of the proposed parking lot.
Now, if you're bringing the parking lot up around number 7 feet, and how does that compare to the existing elevation of north of the road?
Of the road, I can get that exactly. Take it off our survey.
Well, maybe while he's looking at that, one interesting thing that we're doing to help increase educational opportunities is proposing floating wetlands, which this would be our first time working with this, but I thought it would be a great thing to try with the students. They're basically, you can buy them in all different sizes and shapes, but something maybe the size of a sheet of plywood, and it would be a plastic material that we're proposing 2 of these near the viewing platform, and they float on the water, and there's holes in them, and you would put rooted plants through the holes, and their roots extend down into the water. They're seasonal, so at the end of the season, you'd pull them out. You could do a lot of interesting studies with these. You could take the plants that have grown over the course of the year and study how much nutrients they've taken up or how much carbon they've taken out, and do a lot of interesting experiments with that. And so measure the growth rate of the plants and try different plants. And within our drawings, there is a photo of the product that we're looking at for that on a detail sheet near the back of our package.
One thing, while Brian's working on this, one thing you said that I hadn't picked up in my review was the wetland creation.
Yes.
And I went back and looked through the plans. It's still not clear to me where that is. So
That's a good point.
if you could maybe give a real clear plan for the agency to look at, that would be helpful.
As I was getting ready, I realized it
Oh, there you go.
Preparation.
So, Mr. Galvin, to answer your question about the elevation, at the point along North Maple, here's where the lowest point of the parking lot is. And under proposed conditions for the parking lot, with it elevated, it will be about 13 feet or so below.
Still
Below the road.
And that's where the buses probably would be parked in that area. You gotta get the buses off the hill.
Oh, the maintenance vehicles
Yeah.
will be parked right in this area of
Right.
the site. Yeah. I think they'll be shielded quite well.
Very good.
One other modification between when this application was submitted to you and it's been submitted to the P and Z is the location of some proposed dumpsters that were about 60, 70 feet from the wetland, but they are no longer being proposed in this location. They're being kept in their current location on other parts of the campus. So far, more than 100 feet from any wetland.
Are they covered?
Are they covered? I think just covers
Lids.
lids, yes.
Is there drainage near them?
Don't know.
That might connect them.
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay.
How about the questions? In Fritz's letter.
Well, we want to let Mr. Fritz come up and make his own comments and then have him respond. Do we have any other comments or questions from the agency?
Yeah, Bill, the wetland that comes in from the west, is that pipe now, and you're taking it out of the pipe?
It is not piped here.
But it's not.
Yes.
And you can see the two photos on this side, are images of that. One is looking, this one's from the parking lot looking to the west. This one's from the east looking, from the west looking east towards the parking lot. You can see the playground equipment right up against this.
Okay.
One question, the forested slope from the, what is it, Midland area, Midwood Road area, it comes down toward the pond, and toward that area. Any water quality issues with what comes off that slope?
If there are, it's going to be more of a problem with this watercourse. This watercourse, I believe, discharges from a pipe in this area, and there's a number, it picks up quite a few homes and runoff from streets.
Streets.
Yeah, from the
That's what I was
streets.
wondering.
Yeah. So the pond, there's no surface discharge pipe or anything like that that I've seen. So it's filtering through that forest, the forest vegetation and soils, and making its way to the pond. Certainly, there are some residential landscapes that are running through that, but it has a better, its water source is being better filtered than this water source that's coming down this way.
Okay.
And just regarding the parking, there was a question, that north parking lot goes, the north parking goes from 181 to 192.
Okay. Any other comments or questions from the agency? Okay. Normally, we would ask for public comment. Now, we have a letter from Mr. Fritz, which I believe you,
We do, we have, I can speak to that, or you can, if Mr.
Well,
Fritz is looking to.
it depends, Mr. Fritz. Would you rather make your comments first, or just have them address them as, before you say anything?
I've heard a couple of references.
Please step up. Okay. Please step up, identify yourself.
Yeah, of course. Just the button. I need simple.
Okay, good. My name is Don Fritz. I live at 300 North Maple, which is over here. Okay, so as you see, I border that. I guess my, I just refer you to my end comment there that I felt that the consultants very subtly suggest that, they don't anticipate significant adverse effects to the wetlands. They also, at the beginning, suggest that quality volume and runoff reduction volumes and peak flow control are warranted. So I'm asking you at the end with that in mind, plus the fact that this system now is 35 years old. And 35 years ago, the issue was raised. There was a letter to Headmaster Yule by somebody called Aurelia, who may be here. But okay. The point was that the agency, he wrote to the headmaster saying the agency has expressed concern that activity in the wetlands may affect neighboring properties. So that was 35 years ago. So my point is, 35 years on, what have we learned and what can we apply? So again, I'm asking that maybe if there's any way to look at what alternatives may be interjected here, or what safety margins may be added, I'd appreciate it. I really had three questions. The first one, very broadly, there's three. I always get these terms mixed up. There's three watersheds, right, on the site. One goes south, as they said, into a little wetland down here, and then it's all underground from there, basically to Richards, as I understand. There's another wetland here, which drives this way into a storm system, and then there's the northern side, which goes this way. The northern one is by far the largest, and as I alluded to in my presentation or my letter, it's been increased. The acreage has been increased, the impervious surface has been increased, and the runoff has been increased. And so, to me, I mean, there's a lot of work here, a lot of good work, but I'm missing the common sense question and the intangible one that says we're going to, after 35 years, increase this and, dump it into the neighbors. And I'm just wondering why that makes sense and whether any reasonable alternatives were looked at. You say, well, what alternatives? Well, runoff water has been diverted from here this way and here this way. Can any more runoff water go into the southern? Can any more runoff water go here? That's about all you can do at the end of the day, or, add more storage just to back it up. So that's a very broad, question in terms of what alternatives have really been looked at. I'm not clear, as you talked, there's a watershed here that was alluded to. It's pipe here, and it comes to this point, right? There's a watershed here, some of which goes around the parking lot into the wetland, some of which today goes into the parking lot and is handled down by this berm. The proposal actually increases the amount that skirts the parking lot and goes into the wetland. There's also, do you want to talk to a little system you've built up here, which I think is positive, aren't you? Yeah. Okay. Because I think there's been a safety margin built in here because some runoff water is going to be accumulated, and then, as I understand it, slowly fed. Now, down here, there's an actual, there's a mechanical discharge, is there not? You've got, not a pump, but you've got a structure, and you've got an 8-inch pipe and a 10-inch pipe and an oil separator. So that really determines how the flow of the water into that wetland, right? And that's basically being retained, right? It's going to be new, but essentially it's the same mechanics.
We can't really have a dialogue like this.
Okay.
You're going to have to make your testimony.
All right, okay. I'm just trying to get clarification. Okay. So there's a mechanical system down there that the water is forced through, which meters the flow rate. That's really not changing at the end of the day. But there is, safety built into accumulating the water here. Now I'm unclear, but the drawing suggests that there's a pipe runs from, that system connects into a pipe which runs through the wetlands. I haven't seen that pipe. I don't know where it ends. Supposedly, there's also now on the drawings, a 12-inch tile between the two properties. So that's how the water exits the wetland and goes into what I'm calling a brook, which I said turns into a stream, when the water discharges. So the observation was made that this is really a non-functioning wetland because the water's almost forced through it. And so So nothing has really changed there. And in fact, there's some suggestion that maybe that tile system, and again, there's no record of when any of this went in, what purpose it was to serve, and how it's functioning today. But as to that pipe and as to the tile. So if that tile system is damaged, then the water could be exiting, I said, at 2.5 to 3 times the 12-inch tile design. So I think that's something that we discussed on a site visit that was going to be revisited. And finally, again, the study cites a lot of models, the study cites standards, the study cites regulations, but at the end of the day, your discharge, I would hope, would be determined on what conditions exist beyond. And that's, there's 3 properties along here. All of this, again, discharges under North Maple through 2 or 3 more properties, and then ultimately into some, you probably have a name for the pond over here, and then in behind Andrews Road and across north, et cetera. But it is a problem. The problem now, many people already down in Echo are running their sump pumps 24 hours a day, and there's ponding down there. So my question was, when we assess what the discharge rate is going to be and how we get rid of this water, I think it's important to understand what changes maybe have taken place down here over 35 years. Maybe the town's made big improvements to that area, but I'm not certain of that. So again, the third area is, have the conditions outside the GA site been thoroughly investigated as part of the basis for defining the discharge rate? So I think there's some questions there, okay? And my concern, of course, is I'm in 300. I'm the guy that gets the first bucket. And, I made the comment, seemingly it's increased in frequency, but I have more streaming, which, of course, erodes the property. So I am concerned that, whatever we do here is done with good margins and good intentions, okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Brian, Ms. McMahon, the tile, subsurface tile pipe, is that on the Academy's
Yeah.
property?
Yes. Nope. Yes, there's a tile pipe that runs down, as Mr. Fritz explained, just before it gets off the site, at the northerly limit of the campus here, it stops. There is some extent, not very long, but some extent of open channel flow, and then it enters another pipe that crosses the property line, and I believe discharges north. One of our, Mr. Fritz alluded to it, one of our project engineers, Andrew Kuzmich, has met with Mr. Fritz a couple of times, once at the site, once in the office. And they have been out there to see that. I understand that the pipe is fairly heavily overgrown and not readily visible there. But I appreciate Mr. Fritz's comments, and they're understandable. I thought I might just take a step back. I had intended to do so earlier and just give a really brief summary of what's going on out here. The earthen berm was placed in 1985 to hold back to hold back water, to serve as a surface stormwater detention basin to offset the increase in runoff that was due to the expanded parking lot at that time. Pretty common, as Bill said, it's not entirely common over a parking lot, but surface detention basins are very common. What has changed in 35 years, I think, well, one of the things that has changed in 35 years, I think, to Mr. Fritz's point, is the town has got much more vigilant about controlling development and how it affects stormwater management. So the town has a robust, and some suggest overly, almost oppressive, drainage manual. And we're bound by that drainage manual. And so what it does, it doesn't, back in 1985, what has changed, it was I don't want to say it was easy, but it was common to put a detention basin in like this that would allow stored water to inundate parked cars. And so what we're trying to do here is not just move that water below the grade, but we also, and meter it out, and yes, he's correct, Mr. Fritz is correct, excuse me, there will be a meter structure similar to the one that's out there now, but we're also bound to put water back into the ground, a certain prescribed amount for the drainage manual back in the ground. So we're not just holding it back temporarily and discharging it out through the same pipe. We have to create a reservoir of stone and an opportunity for that water to get back down into the groundwater table, which is what we've done here. And I just point out, in conformance with the drainage manual. Mr. Fritz, though, brings up an interesting comment in his letter. He says that the wetland might be better off if it weren't piped through the wetland, if the pipe weren't there. And I think he may be right. And it's something we'd like to explore to incorporate into this plan. I think if by cutting the discharge pipe that runs through this wetland now, stops briefly to open channel, goes back to another perhaps clog-prone pipe that crosses the property line and heads north, I think that might be a thing we'd like to explore incorporating into our plan. I trust the agency staff and the members might agree that more water running overland and less pipe flow would be a good thing. So we think we can incorporate such an improvement whereby we abandon the pipe. I suggest abandon it in place rather than remove it because it's not worth the disturbance to the wetland just to dig the pipe out that you're not going to use anymore. But allow the water to discharge here up on this end, the high end of the wetland here, and to realize the benefit of the attenuation of overland flow through that wetland. It will need to be some type of energy dissipator to break the energy to non-erosive levels. Will have to be proposed at the outlet here or thereabouts, but that's easily done. So I think to his point, I think it's a good one, and I think we should consider incorporating that in.
Good. Just for my own edification, I assume the drainage manual would require you to have a reservoir large enough under the parking lot to absorb all the water that when you get 4 feet and floating cars to...
Yeah, it makes up, the challenge with this stormwater design was there was already a lot of storage that was being realized there at the surface. And so to replicate that, plus any additional storage to A, offset an increase in impervious coverage, and B, address the new water quality requirements of the drainage manual. So there is more storage there than there had been at the surface, or is now at the surface.
Okay. Does that mean you're going to have to excavate under the parking lot?
Well, we're filling the parking lot up, but there'll be some areas where there'll be excavation for the stone bed that goes underneath it.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
And I'm sorry for interrupting. Last thing, just to remind the agency members, we have incorporated in the design here a certain extent of porous pavement, and Mr. Fritz alluded to, we also have porous pavement over here at the new maintenance facility parking lot as well.
Thank you. Is there any potential that I heard Mr. Fritz make a comment with? Is there any potential to move water in a southerly direction from the pond?
I heard Mr. Fritz's comment. The short answer is I think there may be some opportunity to move some water easterly or southerly to take it away from the north. I would suggest that it wouldn't be a significant amount of water, but I think we can refine things to move some of the water that we're now proposing towards the north off to the south or east.
Because that water is piped, as I recall, right, from the pond?
It is piped underneath the athletic fields to the south.
Right. And then it continues. Does it open?
It opens up to a small pocket wetland. I don't know, Doreen, if you can. Yeah, down by Deer. Here we go.
Yeah.
A small pocket wetland right at the southerly edge of the athletic fields here. And then it goes back underground into a pipe system that goes out into Deer Park Drive. Eventually, I think it goes past the hospital.
Yes. But any water, I think, that could be moved in that direction would be beneficial.
I think there is, to answer your question, I think there is an opportunity to refine it to take a little bit more water towards that end.
The drainage manual looks to have the existing watersheds maintained.
Yeah, that is true.
Very good. And I'm pretty sure that people at the end of Francine Drive don't want any more water directed to the east.
Okay. Are there any other public comments on this application? Okay, I think we're in a position to leave the application open, public hearing open.
Great.
Very good. So we will look forward to seeing you again. I think we have a bunch of stuff to talk about. The pond dredging, the aeration, the wetland creation, and removing the tile pipe,
Thank you.
amongst others. Thank you. Sorry?
Oh, one question. We didn't ask how many cubic yards get brought in to raise that parking lot, 7 feet.
Ask Bob to ask him.
Bob,
Yes.
the number of cubic feet of fill to be brought in to raise the parking lot 7 feet, that's got to be a lot of fill.
Yeah, it's mostly crushed stone, but yeah.
Well, whatever. That's a
Right.
number I think we ought to see next time. Some idea, order of magnitude.
Well, we've lost our audience here. All right, we're moving on to pending applications at this point. We're up to 2018-126, 260 Stanwich Road, Mills Engineering for Stanwich Road Holding for a 2-lot subdivision.
All right, the agency looked at this in October, and as we discussed in October, the applicant is not currently seeking to build any new houses on the 2 lots they want to create out of this current 1 lot.
Just a second, Bob.
Yes, sir.
Gentlemen, if you'd like to move your conversation outside. Okay, Bob.
Okay, so this is strictly an application to get a conceptual approval for a subdivision. But as we discussed back in October, the sort of outlines of boundaries that are set in this conceptual phase, generally those are carried over directly into the development phase. So issues were raised with the separating distance between the proposed conceptual houses that have to be shown on a conceptual plan to prove that it's actually feasible, and the wetland to the west. And the applicant, since October, has revised their plan. They have gotten rid of the 150-foot diameter lot-shaped circles from the lots, which has allowed them to straighten out the lot line and push the southern house toward the road away from the wetland, increasing the separating distance to 60 feet from the prior 33 feet from the patio that was shown on this conceptual house. The whole question of whether this lot circle can be eliminated will have to be determined by the planning, the zoning board of appeals, and Mr. Mills will be speaking to that this evening. The other issue was the width of the proposed buffer, and previously the buffer was, squeezed down to maybe 8 to 11 feet wide, maybe even a little less at the north, and now the buffer's a minimum 15 feet wide, 15 to 20 feet wide, with that section in the middle where it goes out over 30 feet. Boulder demarcation is now proposed, or is also proposed at the edge of this wider buffer, and Mr. McManus provided a supplement to his wetlands assessment and has a list of appropriate species that he thinks would be good to plant in the buffer at the time that these lots are developed in order to enhance the buffer and the wetland. DPW has reviewed the plans and they're acceptable for their purposes at this stage of the subdivision process. Let's see. So I think we could hear from Mr. Mills. I've given conditions of approval that may need a little bit of tweaking depending on how what the ZBA discussion goes, how that goes right now. Please proceed.
It's a very good summary, Bob. Charlie Mills, professional engineer. So as Bob said, I met with staff after our last meeting and the concerns that were raised, and this all stems from the zoning requirement with the lot-shaped circles, where because of the geometry of the lot, we had these funny central curved property lines, and we had a requirement that 1/3 of the house had to be situated within the lot-shaped circle, which forced the southern lot, the house, close to the wetlands. Now, we've made an application, we filed today, Bob, to the Zoning Board of Appeals to eliminate the lot-shaped circles. This enables us to move the house back approximately 25 feet upslope from what was previously shown. Again, these are conceptual houses. To the north, I said before that this was, we went large, we maxed out the FAR just conceptually to show that this could be achieved. On the southern lot, this was always shown because of the topography that we are, essentially we're only going to count 50% of the basement towards FAR, meaning we're going to have a split level home to try and step the grade down to the wetland in that area. The wetland buffer has been increased. I met with Bob to try and see, get some input from him as to, what would be appropriate for this. I think we mentioned previously at the previous meeting is that there was essentially no buffer in some portions on the southern portion of the lot. Now we're showing a minimum of 20 in that area. To the north, we're showing 15. The average buffer width is approximately 22 feet. Now, that being said, is that we don't really object to any of the conditions that have been made by staff. We plan to go to Zoning Board of Appeals, try and get a variance for this. If in some event that they don't grant the variance, then we'll be back in front of the agency again. I brought with me Mr. Brower, who's handling the zoning aspects. If there's any questions regarding timing of the zoning, Mr. McManus is here again to field any questions regarding the buffer. But please let me know if you have any questions.
Are there any agency questions? Are there any public comments or questions? All right. Sorry?
Well,
Do I have a motion on this?
Can
one? Sure.
Little side conversation here. Maybe Mr. Brower can address the agency and explain to us what the timing is on the Zoning Board of Appeals matter.
Good evening, Eric Brower. The answer to that is will be heard probably sometime in the next month or two. We'd also need a preliminary approval from planning and zoning. So this, given the nature of this lot, we felt wetlands was the first item to address. So now we know we have to go to Board of Appeals, and before we do that, we have to have our subdivision. So it's before our decision as to whether the ZBA approves it or not will probably be several months out.
With regards to the ZBA question, is there any chance that it would be done before our next meeting?
No.
Trying to save you the potential reapplication if it didn't work out.
Right. Well, we've got sequencing to do, so we have to go to P&Z before we get heard by them. Then we can, if it all goes well, then we won't be back. But I appreciate the effort. We'll move as quick as we can, but I don't think that's possible.
And Mr. Mills said at October's meeting, he said something about this lot, about the time when it was created, that it could have been a straight line, but then trying to abide by the current regulation, you had the circles got involved, and now you're
Yeah, I don't know when, we're putting the deed history together for the Planning and Zoning Commission. So the property, the Miller property, included land to the south, land to the north. There's old surveys at SC Minor of different configurations when it moved around. So when somebody added the last piece from here, from the south, to make it exactly 2 acres, they had in mind that it would work to the decimal point in terms of acreage, frontage, lot width, everything else. So lot circle, I don't know if that was contemplated or not, depending on what date it was actually created. It goes back at least to the 70s year when this lot was configured.
Very good. Do you have a motion, please? Oh, then I'll make the motion to approve as proposed. No, no. No. If the ZBA doesn't approve it the way it is, they have to come back with a new plan. Can I have a second? All in favor? Aye. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Twenty 18-139, 94 Pexland Road, SE Minor for 94 Pexland Road LLC, subdivision of the property, construction of a residence on the empty lot 84 feet from the wetland.
Right. We got revised plans sort of late in the game last week. I believe I sent them in your packet. If not, Mr. Liebman has the plan for you and can discuss it. He is here tonight to get feedback from the agency on any remaining issues you might have. There are no conditions of approval, so we're kind of going to be brought up to speed by Mr. Liebman.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the agency, Larry Liebman from SE Minor. We have taken this project and you guys have really helped us evolve it the way that it is. The 650-foot long driveway is no longer part of the application. The main lot here of lot 1 is going to come in from the existing curb cut. The lot line has been revised to keep the entire wetland. We're not bifurcating the wetland into 2 places, which was something that somebody recommended or somebody stated. There is a 10-foot walkway going down. That's a planning and zoning requirement. The other thing that I would like to do is to state publicly and for the record that we are not seeking a permit for the second lot. Okay, at all. The second lot of each lot, when it needs to come before you, when a lot is developed for the second lot, it'll be a separate application. We found some interesting things when we started going through the building. There's a photograph that I'll share with everybody in the package of this house from the early 1900s, that says Grandpa Euston's house. So, and the applicant wants to just get rid of all of the extra things that they added to it and just refurbish Grandpa Euston's house, which we think is kind of very, very unique because it is an old founding member of the town of Greenwich. We have moved the only activity within the 100-foot upland review area on Lot A is a little bit of grading here for the backside of the septic system. We wanted to put the septic system in the best possible location so that there wasn't any issues. We did remove and shift the septic tank to avoid the trees, as was also stated. And we also have put a border around the wetlands that aren't going into open space, and we're going to offer that to the agency as a conservation easement area on there. So that whole meadow area is completely protected forever and in perpetuity. We are still waiting to hear back from DPW. I know that there aren't conditions that are written, but the project is also going through the planning and zoning process where DPW is going to review it as well, and hopefully, and I'm sure they'll be approving it as well. There is a issue about a fee. That was an extra $2,000 filing fee that I can give to staff. Thank you. That I received today from the applicant. So really, that we're removing, it's less impervious surfaces on the lot that there's going to be, that we're seeking a permit for, and I guess, I know we don't like to use those terms, but it is a conceptual approval, God bless you, for a subdivision, or it is a subdivision application. If you guys would like to wait until next month, till we come back and do it after Mr. Marucci does it, but I mean, that's your prerogative. If not, you all know that that the planning and zoning process is going to take it through the engineering department as well. And I'm here to note any other questions that you may have if we need to revise the plans further. Thank you.
Any questions or comments? Do we have?
No, I just came in.
Okay. Any public comment or questions? I guess we're delayed till next meeting.
Yeah, but can I just clarify with Mr. Liebman? So conceptual subdivision approval plus your client wants to do the work on the northern lot or western lot, whatever
Right.
it is. Septic, demo parts of the outbuildings.
Demo the outbuildings.
And the driveway.
And remove the excess, the extra driveways and things that are there now. Yes.
Right, so we'll have everything situated next month.
Okay.
I'll raise, I am not excited about conceptual approval. We talk about maxing out FAR or locating things that they look jiffy on a plan, and we call it a conceptual approval. And the next time it comes through, the full expectation is what was approved under concept is what's going to be approved again. I think we create discussions that are unnecessary. These are so, at this stage with community engineering, the grading, the E&S, there's very little left. So I'm not a fan of conceptual approval. I think we don't investigate it as thoroughly as we should because we think we'll get another bite. But when we come back, understand, but this is what was approved before.
Okay.
But what's the alternative? They have the right to present the max FAR.
They have the right to do that, yes. But if presenting that
You're saying
feasibility, if we're like,
scrutinize it,
we'll catch up to it
scrutinize
next
it
time.
more regardless of the characterization of it being conceptual.
And in the end.
I think we're vigilant to that anyway.
Yeah, and we're not recommending that we don't look at the other lot because we're saying that's not what's going to be built. What I've presented to you is what I would consider the worst-case scenario or the furthest impacts. It has a swimming pool, it has large patios, it has everything, it has a maximum building on it. Let me retract what I said. I'm not looking for a conceptual approval. I'm looking for a subdivision approval from the Wetlands Agency. And if any changes come back at the later date, they have to come back to this agency, which is what would happen regardless. So if to eliminate the conceptual part of it, let's eliminate the conceptual part of it and say, we're seeking subdivision approval for 2 lots.
Then that is what you were doing.
I'm not, but I am not seeking a full-fledged permit on the second lot.
Right.
See, I think my way is more important than that. We hash it all out, we say this is good or not good, so if that property owner ultimately has a buyer that can work within that development envelope and within those things, they get the sign off, they go. They don't have to come back to us, they don't have to get anything else. And we can write conditions that pertain to one lot or the other. Not a big deal to do. So this agency reviews it once. And if something changes that it doesn't fit into that scope of that original permit, then you come back.
I agree with all of that, and
Does Larry have to come up with any additional information to accomplish that?
Not having reviewed the plans from the end of last week, I don't know. But
So
I
why
think
don't we
you're gonna
leave it
have the
between you
drainage
and
done.
staff to work out exactly what it is you're going to get?
fine.
Okay?
Yes, sir.
Good. Then this is delayed.
We do need a grant and extension from the applicant.
I'll write it now.
On the back of the check?
The check is the check, it's not my money. It's all right.
Very good. Thank you very much. Is there any public comment? Very good. Motion to delay?
Second.
All in favor? Very good. 2018-143 Taconic and South Stanwich Roads, Tata and Howard for Quarry and Water Company of Connecticut. Now, this is for as-of-right determination to replace a water transfer line with clearing and grading within wetlands.
I have not heard anything further from Aquarium.
We do have a letter, a non-confrontational letter written by Mr. Frank Parker. Is Mr. Parker here? No. Very good. So I guess we'll delay this as well.
Yeah, they're gonna.
There should be a motion and a vote.
We do need to extend,
We need an extension?
we do, so you can request staff to obtain that from, it's an as of right, so it's a little bit weird.
Yeah,
It's, frankly, I'm surprised, I'm taken by surprise they're not here this evening.
What is it? Need an extension?
need an extension, but they're not here. So we can't hold it over till next meeting. Then we have to deny it.
Well, it's an error. Let's see if I can, we'll move on, and I'll see if I can get one of the consultants to respond.
Okay, well, we'll hold that one in advance and come back to it. New applications for review. 2018-111, 16 Lakeview Drive, Edison Carabali, for Mariano Carlos Lozano to maintain a stone path and floating dock within the wetlands.
Okay, in July 2018, the property owner at 16 Lakeview Drive was cited for a violation that included the unauthorized installation of a stone path, steps, and a wall on a slope adjacent to a wetland and pond on an open space parcel, and an unauthorized floating dock in a minor pond. The owners would like to maintain the work done to allow safe access down to the floating dock. A review of the deed of restrictions for the open space and a discussion with the assistant town planner, Patrick LaRose, determined that the stairs and walls are not likely to be authorized by planning and zoning. Further, no application to resolve the violation was submitted to P&Z as requested. Regardless of what P&Z comes up with, had the owners come in advance to installing the stairs and the wall, staff would have guided them to a lower impact solution such as stepping stones or a switchback trail or something similar. If authorization by P&Z is granted, a plan should be submitted that provides these details. In the absence of the P&Z approval, the unpermitted walkway should be removed and the area stabilized with restorative plantings and erosion and sedimentation controls. According to the owner and the contractor, no woody vegetation was removed for the installation of the walkway. However, the disturbed areas, that's approximately 385 square feet, will need to be restored to stabilize the slope where the walkway is removed. This should include shade-tolerant understory trees, deer-resistant shrubs, and herbaceous vegetation, and should conform with the mitigation planting plan guidelines, which is is dated December 22nd, 2015. The floating dock was constructed, is consistent with the guidelines set forth for docks size and material. The license agreement to authorize a dock on town property has been approved and signed by the first selectman. So in the absence of an approval through P&Z and the absence of a restoration plan from planning, and since it's the second 65-day, since the 65-day extension period will be complete prior to our next meeting, the second 65-day extension period, it's recommended that the agency issue an order to correct with the conditions provided in the staff report.
Thank you, Dorian.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, agency members, Tom Hegney for the applicant. Mr. Liebman and I have been retained by them and are in the process of developing a plan that we can submit to you. Unfortunately, as Doreen indicated, time has run out. So to address that, I had submitted to staff earlier today the withdrawal of this application. So there is no application pending before you. There was a cease and correct order that the agency upheld in August. It required the filing of an application, which was done. A fee of $3,000 was paid. And unfortunately, we have not been able to get to the point where we can submit something that will address all of the 6 conditions that the staff has in the report before you. We anticipate that we will be able to do that prior to your next meeting, and we'll submit the application again to address these various points. But for tonight, the only thing that was in front of you and on your agenda has been withdrawn by the applicant. So your cease and correct order that was upheld in August is still in effect. We are still required to meet that and file an application with you, but there's no action for you to take this evening.
So I have a different opinion.
Well,
And that's why I'm here.
Poor Tom thought he had the night off. So I've been speaking with DEP with regards to how we manage our notices of violation or cease and correct orders. DEP's recommendation on how these are to be handled, which I do take some issue with, but this is their position, that a cease and desist is issued or a cease and correct is issued. The agency crafts the order, say what needs to be done to fix the violation. The order is issued and people go off and do what the agency says, which sounds nice and neat, except when you're in the process and we don't have all the information to understand the context of the violation. Was it appropriate? Was it not appropriate? What needs to be done? So this agency uses the application document to get that information in. We review it as if we're reviewing an application, but it's technically not an application. Then the agency issues an order to correct based on that information that was brought in. So the flaw in dealing with it as an application in a situation like this, it's now withdrawn. We have an order that says submit by date certain. That was done, but we're withdrawing it. So we're in a limbo phase because there's no new directive out there for this violator to adhere to. And this no disparity of your client. But the for instance is if this application doesn't come in, or this resubmission for corrective action doesn't come in January, or it doesn't come in February. Now we're in a position that we have to now reissue orders to make something come in. That deadline is failed, then we can turn it off to law. So
Now-
we're losing time and we're creating work for ourselves.
Normally when we do a cease and correct, if the application doesn't come in, we file on the land records and then take it to legal, correct?
Correct.
Correct. Application does not come in.
Came in, but now it's withdrawn.
No, if it's withdrawn, it hasn't come in. Mr. Hegney, would you I mean, in the
The
application. was-
$3,000 that came out of my client's checkbook indicates that something did come in. He did fill out an application, he did submit it. And because the time, the statutory time
No,
periods
I
that we all
understand.
have a constraint to deal with have expired, or will expire prior to your
Right.
next meeting, we're faced with a difficult situation. We want to be able to respond to certain
Well, let me
special
ju-
conditions
let me
that
just
staff has
ask-
put in, but we can't agree to all of them.
I understand. Let me ask staff a question. If we make an order, does the applicant or does the person who has received that order have the right to appeal that order?
At the cease and correct hearing, that's their opportunity to say, you misinterpreted what happened, here's what happened, and if the agency then can say, yeah, that's not a violation.
Well, no, I mean, it is a violation. We're
But I'm just
going,
saying, there's a process for them to have their, you know.
let me be specific.
Contested.
Let me be specific. If we vote on this order and say that this is an order issued by the agency, does the miscreant, for want of a better word,
Well, you could call them applicant, too.
applicant.
Sounds a little
But they're
better.
not an applicant because you withdrew the application.
They're actually the violator.
The violation.
I think we need to search for a few
Does the
more words
receiver,
here.
but does the receiver of the order have the right to appeal that order that they receive?
Everything is appealable, every action.
So that they can come back within the month and appeal the order with an alternative.
But- But
When you issue the order, I think that gets appealed to the court.
Get appealed to them. Well, we don't want to do that.
But
Let me
But-
let me ask you something. So you heard the dialogue and you understand that. The concern is it sounds like we're unintentionally gaming the system, right? Because you got a second bite at the apple.
and that it
Right?
keeps going on and on and
Yeah,
on
yeah,
without
and
resolution.
staff's concern is, of course, the cumbersome nature of this, especially if the applicant doesn't act with vigilance now. Is the applicant here? Can we get a representation on the record?
I am here, having been retained by the applicant, and I will make a representation on the record that an application will be filed with the proper documentation prior to your next meeting.
I think there's a terminological problem. When one submits an application, and the application is granted, one has the right to do something, but not the obligation. And yet, in the context of an order to correct, what we're trying to impose is an obligation. So I think we need to tweak the terminology that we're employing and have this process that we're now calling an application maybe something else, so that we don't get confused, because we don't mean it to be, we give you the right, but rather you are obligated to do something, to correct something that you shouldn't have done.
That's fair, but that protocol doesn't exist today. And this is a function of having discretion as an agency to treat this request with good faith, okay? And they've hired a lawyer, they have paid a fee, it isn't a recalcitrant applicant. So my view is
Well, I
that.
don't know, they've not submitted to planning and zoning yet to get permission to use the open space.
I have reviewed the declaration of restrictions. I have had discussions with the planning and zoning staff. I believe that what they have done and we're proposing to do can be handled within the language of that declaration. If not, the planning and zoning staff does have the ability to accept the changes that have been made to the site within the open space parcel.
Well, the violation was noticed when?
End of July.
So we're, 5 months later.
We're developing the plans. Both myself and Mr. Liebman have been retained. And as I said, we'll bring it to you in January before the January 21st meeting.
highlights why, at Alan's point, we need different terminology, we need to have something that keeps this out of the application permit.
I've never seen this scenario before. I mean, whether we adjust it policy-wise or not, I'm open to it, but I understand.
We've had applicants that have sort of frittered that we've had trouble getting to the table and once we get to the table,
Frankly, this is a new one for me too.
I've never seen a second
And
65 days.
I would certainly be happy to further discuss this with the town attorney's office and have an appropriate procedure adopted through them. But my point tonight is, with the application withdrawn, there's nothing on the agenda to
but that's okay, because
discuss.
the agency can always make a motion and add something to the agenda, with regularly scheduled meetings.
All right.
Well, can we modify the original cease and correct at this point?
Here's what I'd like to do, because I think Tom raises some good points about procedure and concerns. So we had the 10-day notice for the original cease and desist, but now we're in this hybrid of an application. Where does the show cause hearing fit within this? So I would suggest that this requires more discussion. I want to take to legal what the Deep has told me, what our process is, and if it's appropriate, we would renotice a cease and correct for our next meeting on the 25th. I mean, nothing's happening anyway, so that the agency could actually issue the order as recommended by staff at the next meeting. And through all of this, the applicant can always come in with another application. I mean, with an after-the-fact application.
So where does that leave us with this?
You accept the withdrawal, and as far as the order goes, we don't have a time limit on that. So this would just show up at the next meeting. If council says, yeah, go issue the order, then we would do it at the next meeting.
Well, does that mean that we have to,
So you won't have to do anything to this.
No, but when you say issue council say issue the order, that would be predicated on what we're assuming is an application, right?
No, it would be at the very minimum, it will be predicated on Doreen's recommendations. The agency has every authority to take those recommendations and issue an order to correct them.
right?
Well, I would like council to also then advise what we're supposed to do about the newly filed application.
Yes.
Okay, all right, that's fine with me.
Somehow, I don't like that. I'm sorry.
What don't you like?
What I don't like is the fact that we've had a cease and correct hearing. We've set a date for an application, and we've stated that if we don't get the application by such and such a date, we're going to take such and such an action. Now, although an application was filed, it was then withdrawn. So to my mind, there was no application. Therefore, we have to take some sort of an action. Now, it seems we have two choices. We can take the action as originally agreed at the cease and correct, or we can amend the cease and correct to change the date the application is required. How does that sound?
The only thing I'm
You don't like that?
I don't think we can do that.
Because we had the cease and correct hearing, a show-cause hearing, commission upheld
Right.
that, and I don't know without properly noticing the applicant for, it's the limbo.
I think
don't
we're in
know from-
procedural limbo to do
Yeah,
that.
I don't know
think
that
we
this
can.
application that has now been withdrawn, it's not really an application, that we have the right this
Yeah,
evening
I
to
think
issue
we
an
should
order.
just accept the withdrawal and get some guidance
Yeah.
and go from there.
Right, we can't issue an order, right? But we can go on to the land records, as we said we would.
You know, truth be told, unless our house is on the market, it's just something to put on the land record, something,
I just don't want to leave us in a situation where we've said we're going to do something and we do nothing.
you're gonna leave us in a situation for a month,
And we're getting clarification on it, so it doesn't
Yeah.
happen.
so it's
So
gonna stay.
we're
All right.
using our discretion.
Well, and also the possibility of reviewing how we're handling it, so that we don't
Yeah.
have the situation in the future.
Okay,
Better?
We have the check?
We have a check.
And cash the check. It cleared.
It cleared already,
All right.
And we'll give you another one.
The town-
Unless you want to waive the fee
You'll
for the
gi- you'll
second
give the-
application.
Let's be clear, you'll give the town another one.
Good now.
All right. Very good. Okay,
All
let's
right,
go on.
thank you.
Thank you.
2018-149, 36 Crescent Road. Sorry, Soundview Engineers and Land Surveyors for Huxley Investments, construction of a single-family residence.
All right, this, let's see, new single-family residence to replace the existing house. The existing house uses a driveway into the rear of the house from a little right-of-way off of the end of Durkin Drive, Durkin Road. And the applicant now wants to abandon that, do a curb cut off of Crescent, regrade a little bit, make a motor court in front of the house, and come in from there. The back of the house would have some retaining walls and drainage structures, including a rain garden and a high overflow immediately adjacent to the wetland. All right, I've made some comments about pulling the erosion control line tighter to the eastern edge of the gravel right-of-way. And like the Greenwich Academy application, I think because of in this case, the amount of activity running up and down that road with stockpiles, with excavation, this and that, more than a silt fence is needed, either a chain link fence or something to back that up so that there's a hard line at that limit of disturbance. Let's see. Okay, so the drainage calculations are taking credit for removal of the gravel driveway in the calculation of net impervious coverage before and after. The property owner has stated that they've received verbal agreement from two of the other owners who share the right-of-way to allow him to remove the portion on his property. We're not going to get into whether that's sufficient, but I will say that if this is approved tonight, which I'm recommending you approve it with the conditions provided, if it turns out they have to maintain that gravel road, they're then going to have to come back to us and confirm that the drainage system is sufficient to mitigate for that paper increase in impervious post-development. It won't be a paper increase, it'll be a gravel increase. I'm also recommending a permanent demarcation feature 10 feet off the western and northern edge of the wetland, pulling the footing drain to that limit, and maintaining the buffer as a meadow, mowed no more than once a year. And there's some stuff in the wetland, cut brush and other materials that ought to be removed immediately. So Mr. Muller's here. I don't know if he wants to go into the right-of-way issue or just accept my recommendation of approval.
Hi, Brian Muller here for the record, professional engineer in the state of Connecticut, Soundview Engineers, here representing the client. I don't really want to get into the right-of-way. Obviously, if we can't close it out, we're going to come back and we'll have to provide more drainage or at least redo the calculations to provide that we're reducing peak flows and providing water quality. I have no problems with any of Bob's, Mr. Clossy's recommendations. I will beef up the erosion control fence on the eastern side of the existing right-of-way there, and make that part of our final construction drawings that we'll be submitting to him, along with the addressing DPW's comments, which I will be addressing in the next week. Other than that, if there's any questions on how the drainage systems work out here or what we're trying to do,
you have any comments from the public? You have a letter that's been received.
Yes, I've been back in touch with the neighbor and, explained a little bit about how the drainage system, once it's online, is going to reduce peak flows through the 25-year storm. And the neighbor, actually, 100-year storm.
Yeah,
So-
all the storms are reduced.
Right, so all the storms are reduced. And they came back and said they thank you. They're still, they're still worried. But
Typical.
they're not, I don't believe they're engineers.
Yeah, no, the entire site, all the new impervious out here is gonna pass through this rain garden and then overflow to a Coltech system for peak flows, so all the new impervious on the site will be provided water quality treatment before it enters the wetlands.
You have a motion approved? Second. All in favor?
Thank you very much. Have a Merry Christmas.
I felt this is a fairly straightforward application, particularly considering that back when the agency approved the redevelopment of the property in 2004, they approved a pool in this same location. Drainage requirements have gotten more stringent since 2004, so the applicant proposes to meet them through the use of a rain garden and pervious pavement in the sport court, which is beyond the upland review area of the on-site and off-site wetland. The DPW would like some more information about soil characteristics. I believe that was more in the area of the sport court, not
Right.
the rain garden. So I don't really have any outstanding issues with this application. They have provided a planting plan which will significantly enhance the wetland and the wetland buffer. The applicant has been made aware that the size of the plant should be increased as specified in the staff report. And so I recommend the agency issue a permit with the conditions provided.
Larry Levens for SE Minor. We have no objection to what's written in the staff report. Thank you.
Any questions or comments from the agency? Any public comments or questions? May I have a motion to approve? All in favor? Aye. Thank you, Mr. Lee.
I have one more. Oh, that's not me. Not me.
Okay, there's a wetland that exists on the north central portion of the site that consists of lawn under trees. There's also a small wetland that skirts the northwestern edge of the property and flows north to southwest, continuing off-site to a larger wetland system. The area along the stream is wooded. The homeowner is seeking to finish construction of a stone wall to be constructed in two sections along the northern property line, one on either side of the mouth wetland. The disturbed area is approximately 100 feet by 5 feet and includes the development of an earthen berm within the wetland. A planting plan to restore 3 removed multi-stem shrubs should be provided. The berm that's been deposited within the wetland and buffer, and an accumulation of leaves that have been blown towards the watercourse should be removed. The increase created by the stone walls, the homeowner expressed an interest in installing a deer fence to close the gap between the stone walls. If implemented, the bottom of the fence within the wetland and a 35-foot buffer should be raised to leave a 6-inch gap to allow for the free flow of water and the passage of small animals. It's recommended that an order the order is recommended with the conditions provided in the staff report.
Is there anybody here? Okay. Do you have any comments on the order that is to be recommended? Do I have any questions or comments from the agency? Any questions or comments from the public? Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
Would you step up to the microphone, please, and identify yourself?
I don't wish to be a difficult neighbor, but I just want to be sure that there is no spring. We, with Wetlands, put a pond, which we now have something like 50 goldfish in, right near the line between Mr. Neighbor's property and our property. We're 149 Weaver Street, he's 145. I have pictures here of what happened today with all the rains that we've had, but I do believe that with building the wall, I want to be sure that there's no spring there, that the water is backing up into our property. I have pictures here. And I think if you're building a stone wall, you have to be obviously respectful of the flow of the water, because I do believe there was a spring on his side of the property. And we had a little tiny narrow channel which flowed into our pond. And I don't want that to be changed. It has been backing up extremely since they pushed a whole mound of earth along there outside the fence in preparation to build the wall. It was almost like the water is being pushed into another direction over to our side. That's all I want to say. Let me show you this. I'm sorry. I don't mean to
Madam,
be
can you
difficult.
please give us your name?
So there's a berm that's in there now that's going to be removed.
Yes, and they're also piped. Yeah, it's okay. We live on part of what was originally Lion Farm, and there were Black Angus cattle there in, gosh, before 1942, I guess. We bought the house in 96, and I think it was owned 2 years prior to that by a couple from California. There is a pipe that runs from Lion Farm east under the ground and comes out into our pond and then flows out as we put a pipe to drain it into the ditch, which was always there. And I just want to be sure that that is continued and it's not, because we care about our goldfish. We had 21, now we have 50. We have lots of frogs, and we have a total nature environment. We have no pesticides on our garden. So that's why I'm here, just to make sure that you know that. We care, we have lots of birds, we have deer, we have everything. So I just want to be sure that the water is channeled properly, and I don't want to be a bad neighbor, but I want to be sure that it's done correctly. Thank you.
The berm that I put, I didn't know I had wetlands.
Yeah, but you do.
Well, it turns out I didn't know. But you filled in a spot there that backs the water up. It used to be a stone there and a channel under it. It had been there for years.
I don't know. The only thing we put in was the fence. We didn't touch anything. Maybe the people
I never had
before us
wetlands.
did.
I never had water.
I think that the berm is
until
the
that-
reason for
that stone
that
that goes
problem.
across.
That's going to be
that
removed.
got
The
filled in.
wall is open on either side. It's not going to change any of the drainage pattern.
There's a tiny, no, from your land, there was a spring. There's going to be a spring there somewhere.
All I want to do is come down the hill that goes up. You're done.
Okay, we're done. Okay.
All right, there's an addition to be built behind the house, and the wood deck there is going to be modified. The driveway coming in is going to be reoriented somewhat, and the first portion of the driveway will be porous asphalt with a stone reservoir underneath, and some retaining walls will be extended and/or built. And the closest activity is about 34 feet from the brook, being one of those retaining walls. This is a pretty tight site. I mean, if erosion controls are maintained and material stockpiling is controlled, I don't believe there should be any impacts from the construction to the wetland and watercourse. The impervious coverage increase is less than 500 square feet, and the pervious driveway will more than compensate for that increase. And we did get a revised plan today that I don't have extra copies of that gives some details for the stone reservoir. So I don't think there's any issue, going forward with that. And the plan I just passed down is the planting plan that the applicant has had their landscape architect prepare to re-vegetate the buffer along the watercourse, which looks very, very manicured at the moment, mulched, very clean, but not natural. So this will naturalize the buffer. So I think all the pieces are in place, and I recommend the agency issue a permit with the conditions in the staff report.
Sure. Hello, everybody. I'm Keith Werner from Onum & Kirby, professional engineer. We're the engineers and surveyors of record for 12 Hillcrest. I think Mr. Cossie summarized what's going on at the site very well. It's just a one-story addition off the back of the house, some deck modifications, and reconfiguration of the driveway. As you can see, there's wetlands flagged on the southern edge of the property, running from east to west, and we propose to minimize site disturbance and trap all sediment and maintain a healthy site throughout construction. Thank you.
Next application, 2018-158-14 Sawmill Terrace. SC Minor for Jeffrey S. Howard. Installation of a footing drain and stream bed maintenance.
All right, the trio visited this property today, Ms. Curlin, Mr. Schoendorf, and Mr. Rossi. This house has a very serious water issue. The house and grounds are very, very wet, and in order to correct this, the applicant proposes to install a footing drain around the house. The northwest part of the perimeter drain will be in a wetland, which this wetland extends right up to the side of the house. Not really a way to do it otherwise. And in order for the system to flow via gravity, the outfall is going to be quite close to the pond with the pipe and the discharge point in the wetland. There will be, they're going to mow down the Phragmites in order to determine where the channel is and do some reconfiguration of the channel where it's filled in or grown in with Phragmites, which is part of the reason that the water is spreading all over the place around that corner of the house and that part of the yard. I've got a bunch of comments here. All of these comments are reflected in the conditions of approval where appropriate. I don't really want to go point by point. If the agency has any questions, I'd be happy to go into more detail. Or if Mr. Liebman and his client have any issues with the conditions, we'd like to hear them. But I recommend the agency issue a permit for this. It looks to me like an emergency.
Thank you. This is probably the most interesting site I've seen in a very, very long time. The wetlands actually, in my opinion, go into the house. Okay, like literally in the basement. Okay, and this should be done, which is the reason why we submitted the application. And I've never seen the iron bacteria go up the side of a house, like in this instance, because of how much water is there. The septic system, the catch basin in the septic system will be plugged. It'll be filled with concrete, and we will not rip out any pipes or anything, because if we do, that would just mean we'd be before you to do an emergency septic repair. This is one of those early 70s lots that was very questionable when it started. I think that we can get I don't have any objections to what's written in the staff report. There doesn't need to be anything more said. It needs to be fixed.
It looks and smells as if the septic is failing.
The septic system department is not failing, but it has an illegal drain almost in the center of the septic system. That has been there probably for 30 years, I'm guessing. I don't know.
Illegal drain, you said?
Pardon?
Illegal drain.
It's according to the health department, you're not allowed to put a surface water drain. Right. And you're not supposed to. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to get it plugged. I'd like to get the drain in, and I may be asking staff for the ability to place a little bit more fill here and there to make it that it's not rolling back into the house. And as far as fill on top of the septic system, I'm allowed to put fill on top of the septic system if it needs it, and we'll probably dress it up, so to speak. But again, this is I've never seen anything like this in my career. This is the first for me.
Obviously, everyone that was on the site has got a lot of comments, but I don't think they're impacting the recommendation. Any public comment? Okay, a motion, please?
Motion to approve.
Thank you.
Second?
I'll second. I should. Well done. I was struggling because I just tear it down.
14 Sawmill?
Yeah.
Poor guy. How long has he lived here? How long has he lived in that house? All his life? Oh, my God.
And it's a very sad stuff. It's one of those things that happens.
Yeah. Lower cross.
Okay, 24 Lower Cross Road. SE Major and Company for Kimberly Handler for tree removal and landscape improvements. 45 feet in the wetlands.
All right, as shown on the application plan, let me put it this way. The application plan shows 30 trees that the applicant would like to remove from the upland review area. On site, I saw other trees in the upland review area marked with the same red flagging. So there may be more than 30 that they actually had intended to remove. Cutting to the chase on this, to the south of the house, when the agency authorized the, let's see, 1992 construction of the house. 1992, construction of the house, the agency established a 75-foot undisturbed buffer to the south of the house. Now, there are trees, as I said, not only within the well, I'm saying it now, not only in the upland review area, but within this 75-foot buffer. Some of these may be appropriate to remove because they're hazardous. But I'm not an arborist, but just looking at things, it appeared to me that a lot of these trees were more of an aesthetic decision than a hazard decision. And therefore, I'd like the applicant to justify more than just a list of trees, why they need to do all of this clearing. And I also want them to explain how it is that they can do all the clearing without offering any mitigation. The wetland to the southwest of the property, that circular detached wetland, is a vernal pool. And I'll point out that Ms. Curlin, Mr. Schoendorf, and Mr. Rossi visited the site. That's what a vernal pool looks like. So I have a lot of issues with the trees that are proposed for removal. Most of the trees proposed to the south of the house within that 75-foot undisturbed buffer. The boulder demarcation extension is also actually cutting into the 75-foot undisturbed buffer, so I have an issue with that as well. And I also, this may be a moot point if they're not removing all those trees, but access to the back of the house with anything other than hand equipment is going to be very difficult. So I recommend the agency delay this application and look forward to getting some information or a revised plan. This is what I really would like to see.
I believe, Larry Lehman again, the proposed demarcation feature is my fault, because I said, oh, wouldn't it be good if we just connected it, so that then would stop it from anybody going any further. They don't need to do it if they don't, if they don't need to do it, so we'll take that away. The arborist, we do have an arborist, and the trees 4 through 7 are too close to the pool. I mean, those aren't, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Over here, that's then the pool is right here. That's a, you know, dropping stuff into the pool, that's understandable.
Yeah, they are, those are evergreens.
Pardon?
Their drop line is not quite
They blow into the pool, how about that? I'll change that. A tree aid is going through a feature American beach, so they'd like to remove tree aid and leave the American beach. Trees 9 through 11 are young, small caliper Norway spruces, planting too close to the house. 12 and 16 are shrub-like in form, and they get little or no light.
I'm going to interrupt you, Larry.
Go ahead.
My staff report, I specifically call out many of those trees saying they're not an issue.
Okay, sorry.
They're not an issue. I mean, the ones around the pool, some of those I didn't call out, so
Okay.
some more supportive removing those. It's specifically the trees 13 through 22.
Okay.
And anything to the south of trees 20 and 21, because there's more stuff marked in there.
So, when we came to the site today with some of the members, it would seem prudent to see Bob agrees. If we staff meet on site with the arborist.
That would be perfect. That would be perfect.
Who's the arborist? Can you just identify him? Because you were reading off of
From Sabre Tree, Roger Knoop, K-N-O-O-P.
Is he a certified arborist?
He's a certified arborist. it's easier.
winter berries that are marked in there.
We'll do that. Thank you. Thank you.
Do you have a motion to what?
Motion to delay.
All in favor? Aye. 749 Lake Avenue.
That's been postponed at the request of the applicant.
Darn. Good job. All right. 2218, page 161. 65 Rockwood Lane. We have here Joseph P. Rizzoli for Sifu and Jennifer Howland for construction of a pool, patio, etc. 3 feet from the lake.
All right, the agencies reviewed two applications last year for activities on this site. The first was for residential additions, patios, and drainage and grading. The second was for a new septic system. Those activities have been completed with the exception of the patios that were approved behind the house. The applicant has now decided, rather than that patio, they'd like to have a pool with other configuration of patios and planting areas, things like that, retaining walls. So, and as Mr. Benton stated, I mean, these activities go to within 8 feet of the edge of the wetland. That's for the pool equipment pad. The retaining wall is at its closest to 17 feet off the wetland. The drainage is from the increased impervious coverage is to be handled by a rain garden. And it's notable that the roof leaders are to be directed to the rain garden because one of the conditions of the residential addition approval was to direct the roof leader from the addition to a splash pad at grade. Currently, all the roof leaders are directed into pipes into the ground, so that's not compliant at this point. My questions had to do with proximity to the wetland. When this was initially presented or submitted, we had not received any kind of mitigation. I was concerned that the planting bed that currently fringes the back of the rear of the backyard between the split rail fence along the wetland and the edge of turf was going to be encroached into even more than it already may have been by the prior approved activities. The applicant has submitted a planting plan at this point to greatly enhance that edge and also plant up the rain garden. So that's maybe not as big a question as it had been when I wrote this report. The second thing, though, that we haven't gotten is any kind of a biological narrative. Also, DPW has asked for additional information about the drainage, and they asked the same question I asked Mr. McTighe when he ran me through this application, why there's no drainage proposed under all these patios in the backyard, because the soils there are pretty deep. So just something to consider. And so I don't have conditions of approval tonight. I recommend the agency delay. That's about it. Rockwood? Oh, I mean, that was a long time ago.
Was this delayed to the last meeting?
No. No.
Good evening, Jim McTighe from Rizzoli Engineering. So as Bob pointed out, the proposal in front of you is for some pool and patio behind the residence. We have a very limited property. We have a stream that runs through the front yard, another stream that runs through the backyard, and we received permission from you guys to do an addition to the house, and then subsequently we reconstructed the septic system in the only place that we had that met the 60-foot setback, and it required crossing that, and you guys gave us permission to do that. That was successfully implemented, and that went well. So the clients right now, the only usable yard that they have, for a private space is right here behind the house. There is a historic demarcation, this rail fence, that is going to be maintained, and it comes all the way around the site, all the way out here to the front. All of our activity is within the developed envelope. This fence has been here a long time. I don't know how long it's been here, but it has been here a long time. So we're looking to just provide some patios, and due to the grade changes, we've dropped the patios down to make the elevations work and to cascade down the hill, and we're looking to just do a small pool in this area. We have a pool equipment off here on the backside. And in regards to your questions on the drainage, Bob, we're proposing a rain garden over here. The rain garden does have a liner. The soils are Class D soils, which are you're not allowed to infiltrate into the Class D soils, hence the rain garden with a liner. And in lieu of doing a system behind the house, we're looking to pick up all the roof leaders on the residence and put them into the rain garden to renovate the water and cool it down before we release it. And then anything that falls on the patios here would just sheet flow off into the wetlands.
But how does that reduce the runoff volume? You're increasing impervious coverage by more than 1,000 square feet. I think it's like 2,000.
Right, but this was the house that had a small addition, had a 500 square foot addition. So most of the residents, it was an existing condition. And so the area of the pool and the patios is smaller than the residents. So we're picking the residents up as an offset rather than picking the patios up. And the site is tight. We have a septic tank and pump chamber here. I can't have any drainage within 25 feet of them. I can't have any drainage within 10 feet of a wall or a pool per the town drainage manual. So placing structures underneath the patios becomes very difficult. This is going to be a fireplace here, and we have retaining walls and retaining walls. So getting a cul-de-sac underneath the patios would be very difficult, just from a practical, horizontal separation issue. And we'll be glad to provide you with the environmental assessment.
Can I suggest that you confer with Mr. Marucci about that?
I have an appointment with him on Wednesday.
Okay, because I'd still like infiltration behind the house explored.
We can look into that some further for you. Any other questions?
So, I guess there's always the question as to why the patios have to be quite so extensive.
This is a 10 scale plan. This is a lawn panel. This is going to be a stone patio. And this is going to be a stone patio. But these aren't big areas. These is like maybe 12 by 14, 12 by 14. This is barely even 10 feet wide. So, it's a 10 scale plan. They're really not big patios, and this is not a big pool.
Any questions or comments from the agency? Public questions or comments? Motion to select.
I'll make that motion.
Okay, thank you.
All in favor? Thank you very much. Okay, applications to be received. Can I have a motion to receive that?
Before we move on, I was able to get a hold of Matt Kopp, representative for Aquarian,
Yes.
back to 2018-143, and he is authorizing the extension.
Very good, thank you.
So you need a motion to delay.
motion to delay 2018-143, cover our bases. I make such a motion. Can I have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Bases covered. Make a motion to receive applications 1 through 7 as delineated on the agenda, in the orange agenda sheet.
So moved.
All in favor? Violations. I'm sorry. Are there any questions about the agent approval? Cease and correct order 2018-24 for Laura and Brian Markovich, 11 Brewer Lane. Unauthorized removal of vegetation and manipulation of the wetland.
I'm going to read into the record of documents for 11 Druid Lane. Email chain between Mark Winitsky and Patricia Sesto and Doreen Carol Andrews dated October 18th, 2018. Photos dated October 19th, 2018. 2008 GIS map. An email chain between Laura Markovich, Patricia Sesto, and Doreen Carol Andrews dated October 24th, 2018. Permit 1998-099 for 33 Hearthstone Drive, permit map. Letters to the neighbors at 33 Hearthstone Drive dated October 29th, 2018. Notice of violation issued October 26th, 2018. Violation summary and cease and correct order 2018-14 issued November 19th, 2018. Staff was notified by a homeowner that was experiencing significant amounts of stormwater runoff originating from the neighboring property at 11 Druid Lane. The water was causing the catch basin in their lawn to overflow, and they believe that the cause was the result of recent activity that occurred at 11 Druid Lane. Staff met with property owners of 11 Druid Lane and determined that one tree, about 4 to 6 inches in diameter, was removed in addition to about 4 wooden shrubs. A screening of evergreen trees have been installed around the perimeter of the property, and the soil used to support the newly installed trees created a small berm along the rear of the property. Otherwise, there have been minimal disturbance to the topography and the location of the wetlands. Notice of violation was issued to the property owners by regular and certified mail on October 26, 2018. Cease and correct order 2018-14 was sent to the property owners by regular and certified mail on November 19, 2018, and again on December 10, 2018. Staff recommends that the agency maintain the cease and correct order and further recommends that the certificate of violation be placed on the land records as an application to correct the subject violation and received by January 7, 2019.
Hi, good evening. I'm Laura. Oh, that's very loud. Good evening. I'm Laura Markovich. The property has been in my family for over 60 years, but it belonged to my grandparents who passed away. My grandfather most recently 5 years ago. So I, in the process of taking care of the property, is becoming aware of the various history of the land, I should say. But ever since we had I met with Ms. Sesto and Ms. Andrews on our property to discuss the complaint that she just described, we've been engaging ever since just to make sure that we understand. I've been speaking with experts to understand the topography and the soil and so on. There's been some information that we've submitted. There's more information that we've received since the last hearing. And what we'd like to do, if I can, is respectfully ask for just one more extension to digest the most recent information that we have. And I'm happy to, provide more information about that if you have questions.
How long would you like it extended for?
I understand your next meeting is in 5 weeks. I don't necessarily think that we'll need the entire 5 weeks, and perhaps that we might be able to speak before then, based on what we've heard. But if that's works with your.
So our meeting is on the
25th.
So do you think you could get it submitted by the 25th of January?
I think so. And submission, by that you mean either the application or anything, any other response?
The application with that material, yes.
Just so you're clear, you have to clear the violations.
With whatever position we're going to take with that application. Okay, understood.
If you don't think it's a violation.
Okay,
Explain
okay,
the lack of detail.
okay, sure. Well, I mean, I'm happy to answer more questions.
Certainly. I'm Michael Finkbeiner. I was retained as the surveyor in question. I'd like to, excuse me, fill you in. There is a lack of specification as to who's involved in this and what the status of the properties is. The Markovic property is on a hill, top of the watershed at elevation 80. The wetland delineation appears to follow the 72 contour, but in the 1961 subdivision map, there is a watercourse shown that flows across 29 Hearthstone, 33 Hearthstone, 39 Hearthstone, and there is a note on the map as well as in the deed for the Winitsky property specifying a 10-foot wide drainage easement to maintain this flow of water. Now, what has happened since 1961 is that this catch basin on number 33 Hearthstone and this catch basin on number 39 Hearthstone have degraded the ability to carry water away. And therefore, in 1998, Larry Liebman, in behalf of 33, this property that we're looking at, applied for drainage improvements to pump water out of this wetland and to get it to Hearthstone. 20 years later, we now have had, as you're well aware, an increase in the designated intensity of storms so that we're getting more water for a 25-year storm or a 100-year storm than previously.
Are you saying, what's the point?
Well, what's the violation?
Violations are articulated in this order.
No, I'm sorry. Could you please explain to Mrs. Markovich what the violation is? What did she do that is a violation? Did she make it rain? Did she make it rain? I mean, the complaint is that stormwater, sheet flow stormwater, and there's a video to document this, in the intense storm of September 28th, there was sheet flow down this 10% slope onto the water.
The violation is removal of vegetation and minor grading within a wetland.
Where is the evidence that this was a wetland property? May I point out that your agency, under your regulations, is required to maintain an inventory of wetlands. You published a 1997 inventory that has no wetlands property east.
Were the wetlands flagged on this property?
I'm sorry?
You had somebody out and flag the wetlands on this property?
We did, but then in speaking to someone else, well, two things. First, we did have somebody perform that, Mr. Thiel, who's here this evening. And then in speaking with him, there were some other things that he wasn't aware of when he had done that, which I can explain the larger story. So the people at 33 Hearthstone had done some work that, I think it was inadvertent, but had done some work that came across the property line.
If I may explain, this is...
No, I'd like to hear from you.
Yes, sir.
So, Otto's out, he flagged the wetlands, he found wetland soil, flagged the wetlands, that extended from, I'm not sure who's right behind you with the birch
33.
trees. That's 33?
33.
Right, so we know they have known wetlands on their property, they're flagged.
Correct.
That extends onto your property.
He found some disturbed area that was
Okay.
right on the border, but there's and again, these discussions are, we've been having discussions and getting more information over the course of time, so these aren't
So
finalized.
you're saying the area is not a wetland?
Well, it's,
Taking that back?
It is in doubt. There are mitigating circumstances for
No,
the delineation.
It's either the wetland soils meet the criteria or they don't. We flag the wetlands.
well, then, and then, so there are now questions there, which may be resolved, it may stand, it may not. We just want to make sure that we finish that discussion and make sure that we understand that. And on top of that, another thing, we haven't spoken with Matt Troy, who had done some work on the specific area, and in his view, that it was not, and that it was not wetlands. So these are still things that we're considering. We want to make sure that we're giving it proper thought and consideration. And it may be that it ultimately.
So at the very least, we have this activity occurred within a regulated area from 33 Hearthstone, because we've got mapped wetlands on that.
The activity that 33 had done?
Yes. So, very best case, you're in a buffer, very worst case, you're in a wetland.
All right, Larry Liebman clarified for me verbally today that his mapping of 33 Hearthstone, which he received in 1998 under his name with a signed survey, did not show mapped wetlands on 11 Druid.
I'm not saying that it did.
All
I'm
right,
talking about
so,
33 Hearthstone.
so at the best, or at the worst, depending on your viewpoint, we're talking about a buffer, an upland area. There was no vegetation removed
We have
in
photographs
this.
where, yes, there was. So.
Well, okay, I have, I'm,
So if the issue is, let's start, so this is a
Yes.
show cause hearing, is your position that the order was issued incorrectly and you've got evidence to dispute
yes,
that this area is not a wetland, nothing was taken out of it, and it's not in an upland review area?
I'm sorry, what was the last?
It's not in an upland review area.
no, we acknowledge that it is in an upland review area. However, we assert, pending a little more detail, especially detail from you, as what you think happened, that
You've shared
nothing
the
was
photos.
done that created a violation.
So,
So
Mrs.
if I
Markovich,
may
you've
just-
seen the photos of the, we were out on site, we shared the photos where there was a tree, the tree's not there.
All right.
There were shrubs, but the shrubs aren't there, and there was pachysandra or other ground cover, which is now.
English ivy. It was English ivy that is not there.
My fault. English ivy.
All right, well, this was a picture pre, activity, let's call it. This was in June of 2017, the planting. So there were 2 pine trees in upland removed. I'm sorry, excuse me. There were 2, this is the before. This is the, and also this was a before, looking upslope. So the property line was previously thought by the downslope neighbor to be this upper area. So there was disturbance in this area caused by the neighbor. SE Soundview was hired to stake the line. This is their stake.
So this is your on Hearthstone, 33 Hearthstone.
This is
looking
the
back.
33 Hearthstone property. And so they relocated the playground. There is now a building standing here.
Well, the
But-
border of the playground, I mean, the playground was.
All right, so this little stone curve. Well, this was during the planting, so this is, if there was a violation, it was that this was the before. These 2 hemlocks were removed, and there was a 4 to 6 inch red maple, none of which were in a wetland, were removed. This is the planting operation where 20 cypress.
No,
I'm sorry.
That is, you are
Let's-
standing right here. You're looking this way.
All right. I'm sorry, I have not seen this picture before.
Are you welcome to come in and take pictures?
Thank you, thank you.
Take a copy.
Okay,
What we're looking for is a minor restoration.
all right, now, this is the current, you know, the wetland, that this, if we agree to the delineation, it comes into the property about 10 feet. So there are about 6 of these trees planted in the wetland. So we're open to your suggestion as to what you think of remediation. We think the
So the
remediation
issue tonight is
enough.
whether the agency upholds the cease and correct order, modifies it, or withdraws it.
Well, there's no activity to cease from.
Yeah,
That's
no,
for
so
them
I
to
think we've established. So my suggestion is, rather than elaborating any further, either you just state on the record that you're challenging the request for the issuance of an order, or prepare an application. And if you are challenging it, let's vote and move on.
All right, may I raise the issue?
Because you started, by the way, Mr. McBurney, you started as the applicant with a request that you have a bit more time so you can collaborate and make certain determinations, right? So the time to make those determinations, if you're challenging the violation, is now. If on the other hand, you're intending to remediate by accepting this threshold determination that there was a violation, then we have to move on. Is that clear?
Well, my concern is this, is that we have information from Otto, which we had spoken with him today and still want to digest that. Also had spoken to other, Matt Troy, who had actually done the work here, who was experienced with the soil, who didn't find anything resembling wetlands there, and if anything has trees there that.
Right,
So-
and so your own advisor here just said at a minimum, you might be looking at a regulated area that's an upland review. Okay? So if that's gonna be your position, articulate it, put in a remediation plan, and let's move on. If on the other hand, because to me, it's obvious there was an activity and it was in a regulated area. Based on what we've heard, this threshold evidence establishes that. Your points are too unrelated, frankly, to even challenge it. So the question then becomes, make a determination right now, or if you're disagreeing that there's a violation, state it, in which case we'll have to vote. Otherwise, you have to remediate.
Is it conclusive with the wetland?
Yes, we have a soils report. So they have a little bit of wetland soils on their property line, and then it's upland review.
So it's definitely an upland review. No question.
Yes, but I think it is not, out of place for us to ask what regulation we violated in an upland review area. Are you?
There was a deposition of material which created the berm for the trees. There was minimal vegetation removed. Not a big violation.
And it's not a
That's
big
the regulated
remediation.
activity.
So a deposition of material, you mean that we brought in materials?
Right, so when the berm was created for the planted trees,
Well, I have to challenge,
are you saying this material was not removed? Were trees and shrubs taken down or not?
in a wetland?
No, we're just
Yes,
answering.
in an upland review.
Okay,
The
I
upland
think
review
okay.
extends to the back of the house.
Very
So,
good.
yes, something happened in the backyard.
We're done.
May I ask you what regulation?
With respect, I know, I do want to move quickly on this, I really do. But we've been trying to talk to a lot of different experts, and I want to make sure that I fully understand. And it may be that we're in full agreement, but I don't know that sitting here today, and I just would respectfully ask for until the next session, just to be able to finalize that. And it may be that we're to make an application.
We agreed to do that about 20 minutes ago.
Okay. This is actually, we continued from the last meeting. No, they're asking to delay making a determination of whether to uphold, modify, or reject the order.
And we'd be fully prepared to do that by the next day.
The agency doesn't have to go along. I mean, you can do it. At the very least, we know this all occurred in an upper review area.
Are you saying we're being requested to delay this hearing?
That's correct.
What we know right now is that vegetation has been removed from the upper review area. That is a violation. So I would move that we maintain the cease and correct order and require that an application be filed by January 25th. I second.
You can do that, based on everything you said. You've already gotten a lot of material. By the time you've got it, you're digested. And it's a minor correction.
I have a question. All of these experts that you're consulting, I presume you're paying, right?
Yes.
Yet there's a minor correction to be done. So is the point an ideological one that you don't want to do it? Because from a practical standpoint, it seems that you're spending a lot of money and many consultations when the remediation seems to be a very small one.
If I may answer for the
No,
client.
you may not.
No.
You may not.
All right.
So as you can imagine, I don't want to spend money that I don't need to. So I don't want to do it. I'm not doing it lightly. I just want to make sure that it's correct. It's one of the things that a lot of the paperwork and a lot of documentation that there's been on this property, I'm finding out about myself now. And so, and it's not that I'm trying to delay that. It's just that I'm dealing with things that are, 20, 30 years ago, and I just want to make sure that I'm handling this property properly.
We haven't voted on the motion. No. You want to make a motion? We can take it.
Well, I would just, I think Al's making a very good point.
Are you here on this application?
Yes, I'm the one that gets the flooding.
Oh, you're the neighbor, so would you like to make any comments before we actually?
Yes, I would like to. Yeah. My name is Mark Wanitsky. I'm from 39 Hartstone Drive. I bought the house in 2013. I've been there since 2014. I did have a previous flood due to a negligent builder that wired 2 sump pumps onto 1 electrical breaker. So when I did meet with my neighbors, their first statement to me was, well, you've had a flood before. And so I took that to heart very seriously because we've had major rainstorms over the past 4 or 5 years. This is not the first storm in September that we've had. Aside from the pictures that Doreen showed you, I'm sorry I don't have this printed. I think I sent this to the agency as well. This backyard was clearly a 2-level backyard. This was when heavy machinery came in to remove a wall of stones that was about 2 feet higher from the rest of the backyard. So when the water, when it would rain hard, the water would work its way down those stones and then sit in the wetlands. What has happened now is while this heavy machinery came in within a regulated area, the slope and the topography was taken down to almost of a 3-4-5 triangle, and the water coming off of their roof and off of their yard is coming right down into the backyard of their yard, running through the wetlands that doesn't exist anymore because it's been backfilled and there are trees with drip lines, about 40 of them, goes into my neighbor's yard and my yard, and then runs into the catch basin in my corner lot, in the corner of my lot rather. That catch basin takes my sump pump and it takes all the water down from the top of Hartstone all the way down. So ever since this occurred, when this whole backyard was leveled, I am now taking on significant water that's going into that catch basin to a point where I can't, Pat has the videos, I think Doreen has the videos as well, where the catch basin gets overwhelmed and then all of a sudden has almost a foot of water on top of it, so that everything just backflows into my house and backflows into 33 as well.
So while this may seem minor to Ms. Markovich, this is not minor. This is a major issue, and we've already had 30 days since November to get this squared away. And while it may not be planting season, there was significant change to the topography in both levels of the yard that have since disturbed the area and created a water sheet going into the catch basin. Thank you.
I would respectfully say we should act on this motion and then we can get site visits and all this other information gathering.
When was that heavy machinery present? When was the wall removed?
June 8th, 2017.
Noreen, I emailed you a letter, today's letter from Matthew Troy, and if I may just read.
If I may reassert control here, we have a motion on the table, it has been seconded, could we vote, please? The motion is to accept the staff's recommendation that the agency maintain the CC and file, I'm sorry, and an application to be filed by January 25th.
Mr. Ben, do you mind if I just respond to him very briefly?
Yes, I do. It's over. They're over. You can respond to him, but it's not an issue for us to.
But you just took it as relevant for what your decision was, but.
No, it wasn't.
Okay.
In fact, but we've only voted on the violation on the table before us, which is the removal of vegetation in the upland area. The position that's been taken here is that something else was done. Staff will come, talk to you, talk to your neighbor, look at the pictures, and decide whether something else needs to be done. It's not part of what we're dealing with right here.
Okay.
Okay? But we're trying to contain this as much as we can. Yes, we're done. Thank you.
Oh, we voted? Okay, I got the motion.
It was David's motion, I second.
Oh, no, I have Jay as seconding it.
And may I clarify the date?
The meeting's over.
The 25th.
25th.
I'll send a letter.
The
so that
printed
has the
date
date.
says January 7th.
Yes, it does, but we discussed that.
Your client requested something different.
And over it, I will email this to you.
I am over it.
I will submit a hard copy. Live signature.
I don't have it on the agenda.
I'm systematic, but I'm not sick.
Yes, my apologies. Shays Brooks, yeah, it was marked.